Good morning yet again. My name is Dominik Pasic and you're watching BR24 live on this year's Munich Security Conference. It is the third and final day, and they would be amateurs at dramatic arc if they didn't keep the best for last. So let's hop right into, without further ado, the panel discussion Back to the Future, Visions for the European Security Architecture, starting with a scene setting by Josep Borell, Vice President and High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy with the European Commission. This panel is supposed to start at 9:30 sharp, so it should start any second now. Just stay with us. You're watching BR24 live.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the main conference hall. Please take your seats now so that we can begin with the program. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Director of the Istituto Affari Internazionali, Natalie Tocci.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning for this final morning at the Munich Security Council. So here we are to talk about the future of the European security architecture. Now, in all honesty, talking about the European security architecture today is not easy. We are in the middle of a war, and we don't quite know how that war is going to end. And of course, any order, any architecture is the product of a particular configuration of power, and so it will fundamentally depend on how this war will end. So at the moment, there are at least three logical possibilities. We either have Russia winning this war, in which case the order, quote unquote, or disorder that will emerge is one in which the norms of sovereignty and territorial integrity are trashed, and in which an order based on empire and imperial expansion is reasserted. We have the opposite extreme, one in which Ukraine wins this war, and that those norms of sovereignty and territorial integrity are re-established alongside with Ukraine, and not only Ukraine's democratic consolidation. And then, of course, there is always the risk of a fudge in between, one in which neither side really prevails on the other, and in which a sort of unstable stability and low level of violence persists on the European continent. So I don't have a crystal ball, but perhaps the panelists today will. So let me start off by welcoming the High Representative and Vice President of the Commission, Josep Borell, to kick us off with this discussion. Josep.
Good morning to everybody. Our security is being challenged by the war in Ukraine. That's what I told yesterday to the Chinese minister. We are arming Ukraine because this war is a challenge for our security, is an existential challenge for Europe. But I'm not going to be rhetoric and try to go to the point, because Zelensky and the Ukrainians have a lot of applaudissement and not enough ammunition. That's the paradox. They need to be less applauded and better supplied with arms. The Ukrainians are fighting, paying the highest price in terms of lives, but this war happens in European soil affects us and has a global impact around the world, which also affects our security. So let's talk about this short-term, long-term, our neighborhood, and in the wider world. What the German Chancellor called a Zeitenwende, in fact, is a Zeitenwende not only for Germany, but for all the Europeans. I think that we face three major challenges. First, our credibility as a global player. That's what we call the geopolitical Europe. Second, our strategic responsibility as a security and defense provider. And third, our engagement with partners around the world and to preserve or even to rebuild a trustful cooperation with many of the so-called global South. President Macron said about that he was surprised by the big resentment that he perceived in many countries around the world. And I share this feeling. So when I took office in 2019, we started talking about the geopolitical Europe, to use the language of power. Europe is in danger, I said when we presented the strategic compass, and many wondered if this was not just a slogan, an exaggeration, in order to sell better the product. Unhappily, the war in Ukraine has converted these slogans into a reality, a dramatic reality. And it has made us to go up, to wake up to a kind of adulthood. We have rediscovered the brutality of the interstate war in our borders, and we are becoming an actor credible, able to use coercion to the ones who threaten us. As I said, Russia is threatening our security, and we are using coercion. We are becoming a hard power. What he have done, you know, a lot of sanctions against Russia economy and Russia individuals. They are having effect. I don't go on detail, but if you have a look at the trade deficit, budget deficit, and income coming from selling hydrocarbons, these three key variables shows that this year Russia is going down. Last year was a very good year for them. This year is going to be a very bad year because we have been able to get rid of our dependency from Russian hydrocarbons. From 40% gas dependency to almost zero in a few months is an extraordinary achievement. Cap on the Russian oil. They are selling their oil at half the price of Brent, $40, when the Brent is at 80. And military support to Ukraine, directly from the European Union, not from the European Union budget. Let's clarify it. Not from the budget that the Commission managed, but from an intergovernmental fund, a kind of a club that member states happily created in order to provide training and arms to our partners. The so-called European Peace Facility, the member states decided to use this fund to arm Ukraine, 3.6 billion, and the member states, each one on their side, some a lot, others less, provided all in all 12 billion euros of military support. And this is a major achievement. It is the first time that we do that. We have broken a taboo. And it is important to continue doing that. We are the most important trainer of the Ukrainian army. By the end of the year, 30,000 Ukrainian soldiers will be trained by our military missions. I don't go to the details, but this is what we have been doing. But much more has to be done, and much quicker. There is still a lot to be done. We have to increase and accelerate our military support to Ukraine quickly. The first and most urgent thing that the geopolitical Europe has to do is to arm Ukraine. If we said, as all the European leaders here said yesterday, that Russia cannot win this war, that Ukraine has to prevail, then let's go from the words to the facts. and accelerate our military support to Ukraine, because Ukraine is in a critical situation from the point of view of the ammunition available. And I think that we can say that we have been taken too many times to take critical decisions, as providing battle tanks, when everybody knows that in order to win a classical war with trenches and maneuvers of heavy arms, you need battle tanks. You will not win this war without this kind of arms. And now this shortage of ammunition has to be solved quickly. It's a matter of weeks. And this cannot be solved by going to joint procurements and buying, because any procurement that comes to the market will go at the queue of a long list of commands already passed by the member states. We have to use what we have, what the member states have, and they have to provide quickly a part of the ammunition, waiting to refill their stocks with the commands that are already being passed. In the short term, we need, and we have the tools, we have the European Peace Facility that can engage their resources in order to provide quickly ammunition to Ukraine. And in the medium term, we have to increase the capacity of our defense industry, much more. But this is not going to happen overnight. And we have to go, and we also have the tools to do that. We have the European Defence Agency, which is something specialized in these kinds of matters, in order to get more ammunition for all of us, but mainly and with a strong priority for the Ukrainians. Don't confuse the short-term objectives with the medium-term purposes. Short terms, very short terms, more ammunition to Ukraine. This is a matter of the Ministers of Defense. It is the Minister of Defense, the current Minister of Defense, who have to take these kind of decisions. And it's going to be an extraordinary meeting on the 6th and 7th of March, where we will propose to accelerate the process that are already on the way. And I think that working all together, we can manage. More broadly, we have to do our homework. This homework is being defined by the strategic compass that was approved some days before the war started. And there is clearly defined how we can increase our role as security and defense actor. On the new battlefields, the cyberspace, the sea, places where the war will have a different characteristics, maritime security, space security and defense, among others, cyber defense, because, you know, we forgot about classical wars. We were only engaged on expeditions and blitzkrieg, technological blitzkrieg. These old wars, we were not prepared, we forgot about them. And now we have to recover capacity, but keeping in mind that the war in the future will be a different one and will require different capacities. And our industry has to speed up, and our procedures also. It takes almost 10 months for the European Army to buy a bullet for a cannon of 155 millimeters, almost 1 year, and almost 3 years to buy an air-to-air missile. This is not in accordance with the things that we are living today. This is not in accordance with the war situation in which we live. This war has also strengthened the role of NATO, who has become again a crucial actor for the territorial security of Europe, but it's also a way for the Europeans to share the responsibility for their defense. And then let's go quickly to the geopolitical landscape. Yesterday, President Macron and Chancellor Scholz talked about it. We cannot think about European security without looking beyond and engaging with partners around the world. I am traveling around the world, especially on the global south, and I see how powerful the Russian narrative that wants to reduce the war in Ukraine to a conflict between the West and Russia is powerful. And with a lot of accusations of double standards. We must debunk this narrative and explain how Russia acts as an imperialist power. President Macron said a neo-colonial power. Yes, it is what it is. Let's call it. It's an imperialist attitude from a powerful neighbor that wants to take control of someone who belongs to its political sphere. We have to fight the false narrative. We must engage with our partners, defending together the common good, United Nations Charter, but also being ready to accept that this charter has to be adapted to the current circumstances of our world today, which is not at all the world of 1945. The share of wealth, political influence, the number of people is completely different, and we have to adapt to it. This war has also underlined the vulnerabilities and needs of our partners in facing their socioeconomic and environmental challenges. And they fear that we focus only on Ukraine and that we divert from our responsibilities in other areas. They blame us for us. We have to reassure them that we will not do it, that we will increase our engagement and our responsibilities with the rest of the world. Because this war has increased the challenges that the world faces, and both in terms of prices, resources, economic growth, and political and socioeconomic troubles. We have to prove that we continue being a global actor, not only fixing our political, economic, and military capacity in this neighborhood, but taking very much into account in order to face this deep resentment in Africa due to post-colonial reasons. Russia supported us, or in Latin America, anti-imperialism feeling, you supported dictatorships. People have memory and people have feelings. So we have to engage more, showing that we are defending universal values, not only values that are good when Ukraine, our neighbor, is being invaded, but it's a guide for us for our geopolitical action as a security provider and also as someone who defends the United Nations Charter and principles in a constant and comprehensive and coherent way. This is the big challenge in front of us. Short-term, quick ammunitions. Medium-term, increase the capacity of your defense industry. And from now, from tomorrow, and for a long time, to look at our partners in the South in order to make them to participate in the world reaction against Russia for the war in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, High Representative. And now let me welcome on stage Kaja Kallas, the Prime Minister of Estonia. Ulf Kristersson, the Prime Minister of Sweden. And Radek Sikorski, there you are, Member of the European Parliament. So the High Representative there talked about the short, the medium and the long term. And let's try to the extent possible in the next hour and a bit to focus on that medium and long term. We've talked a lot about, obviously, the short term over the last couple of days. Now, of course, we don't have that crystal ball into the future, but what we know is what we can do now. And what we do now can determine, or at least shape, the extent to which we move towards either one extreme or the other, and perhaps avoid that fudge in between. What I would also say, and this points to that distinction between the medium, the short, medium, and the long term, is that there is a difference between what it means for Russia to lose this war and what it means for Ukraine to win this war. And of course, for Russia to lose this war, this is that short-term question, which really has to do with what weapons we supply to Ukraine. However, for Ukraine to win this war, Russia's defeat is a necessary but not a sufficient condition. What Ukraine needs is democratic consolidation, it needs economic reconstruction, and it needs security guarantees. So to the extent possible, I'd really like to focus this discussion on those sort of three sets of issues. And perhaps, Prime Minister Christoph, let me begin with you, perhaps with actually a very broad brush question. Does it actually even make sense to talk about a European security architecture today?
Well, it does, I would say. It makes more sense to talk about using it than to changing it. And honestly, I mean, we lack a lot in Europe, we lack a lot in the democratic world, but we show what we really have. And just give an example, the day before the invasion, the full-scale invasion, I was in Helsinki, rather accidentally actually, having a talk to Finnish President Sauli Niinistö, and obviously we didn't know what's going to happen 4 o'clock in the morning after, but we did discuss that the immediate risk was there. But what we did discuss was actually the other risk. Will we stay united? Will the European Union countries stay united, or will there be serious divisions between countries? And even more, will we stay united with the US? Or will these kind of well-known differences that we had in the previous years, will they be kind of so obvious? And just to state the obvious, we did stay united, and we still do 1 year later. So I think there are, we have to see all the problems, but also see what we have managed to do. And I have extremely big respect for Ukrainians. I was in Kiev 2 days ago, and for them saying, you do deliver weapons, but you do deliver weapons too late, too reluctantly, instead of doing it earlier and more decisive. But nevertheless, there is a structure, architecture. We are using it. We are showing that when we are being put to the test, we actually do deliver. So I think so far so good, but that doesn't at all answer the long-term questions you have asked yourself and us.
And let me follow up, sort of beginning to zoom into some of these issues, and in particular the economic part of this puzzle. Now, could we reflect a little bit about, again, looking ahead to that great day in which Russia is defeated? Here we are thinking about economic reconstruction. In particular, what role do you think that we as Europeans should be playing, as opposed to the United States, other players, multilateral banks? And if we are to do the heavy lifting on this, should we be actually thinking now about what kind of mechanisms should be put in place? Thinking about the models that we used in the recent past, next generation EU-like, to think about Ukraine's economic reconstruction. I mean, it's very clear that we will need to invent some mechanism to cough up with an enormous amount of money. And of course, there's also the element of Russia's role in all of this. Is it possible to think about what Russia's contribution to Ukraine's economic reconstruction should be?
Well, the obvious answer would be what we actually started the work just a few days ago. We have a few hundred of billions of euros in frozen assets. I mean, that's not the one answer, but it's part of the answer. To unite on how much money is there, to unite on the legal possibility, the legal frameworks to be used to actually use these money for rebuilding and reconstruction and, well, other purposes as well. So my basic belief is that we have to be, I mean, this is not a think tank kind of long-term discussion. This is actually to take care of very immediate problems with very long-term consequences. And also to state the obvious, if we want to keep this unity with the US, very well proven yesterday, I would say, the European Union has to prove that we are extremely active in dealing with our own European affairs, not simply relying on the US taking care of it for us. Not at all in contrast to the US, quite the contrary, together with the US, but really be forward-leaning in our European ambitions. And I think in terms of, for example, the frozen assets, it's a complicated question, but it simply needs as a clear answer as is possible, because when we have that answer, we can start to operationalize what we would do with this money.
Thank you. Prime Minister Kallas, moving on to security and defence, perhaps. First, a more medium-term question, as the High Representative put it, and then perhaps a more long-term one. On the medium term, I mean, actually, over the last couple of days, we've been talking quite a lot about how our defence industry really needs to be rethought and reconfigured. And you've recently come up with a rather interesting proposal as to what role the European Union could play in this respect, modelled on the way in which we went about COVID-19. Could you perhaps say a little bit about that? And in particular, how is it that we could ensure that we generate that consolidated demand at European level in order for industry to respond?
Yes, the problem is that Ukraine needs ammunition, and we also need to replenish our stocks. And the question is, you know, in the medium term, is it going to go away, the demand that we have? One is that we have promised in NATO to have this 2% of our GDP as security investments, and I was actually quite surprised a year ago to learn that not many fulfill this criteria that we have agreed. So now there is clearly the demand on the side of Ukraine, but also on the side of European countries that have sent to Ukraine and want to, you know, also increase their own defense, because the risks and threats are higher. So what I've proposed is that we could use the same similar mechanism like we did with the vaccines, that, you know, European Union or European countries provide funds, and then European institutions with a you know, European peace facility would be the one to procure and, you know, make the orders to the defense industry so that they could make the investments to actually make it faster. Because the Russian military industry is working in 3 shifts. Russia is firing in a day the monthly European production of artillery shells. Monthly production, and the European defense industry hasn't boosted its production. So where is the obstacle? Because clearly, if you read the room in terms of the trends that are in Europe, then there is clearly the demand, and in a market economy, when there's demand, there also has to be, or it will increase the capacity. So to make it faster because Ukraine must be able to defend themselves, to win this war so that Russia goes back to their borders, and this is not possible without the ammunition. And what I'm really concerned about is when I talk to some of the colleagues and also the defense industry that has said that, you know, we don't have any orders. We actually don't have orders big enough to boost the production, to make the investments. So it seems to me that some of the countries are still in the hope that it will go away. You know, we will give everything to Ukraine right now, and then, okay, let's draw the line here now and stop this because it's too expensive. And I think Russia is also playing on that, or hoping for that you will grow tired of your own initiatives, and then, you know, they have a lot of manpower, and as I said, their military industry is working in 3 shifts. So how to get through that, even, I mean, when this war ends, the threat are absolutely different, because, you know, everybody could see that what Putin has been talking about, he's actually serious. In 1925, nobody believed Hitler, but he was quite open about these goals. And in 2007, Putin here in this conference was very clear about these goals. The problem was that nobody believed him, but let's believe him now, so that we have to make the decisions in the medium term, but also long term.
Well, absolutely. And in fact, connected to this is, of course, the whole question, again, looking at that long term, of Ukraine's security guarantees. I mean, precisely because even in the best of circumstances, it would be extremely unwise to assume that there is going to be a state of peace. What kind of security guarantees does Ukraine need in order actually for that economic reconstruction to actually happen?
Well, talking from my country's experience, and not only my country, but many in NATO, then NATO is a peace project. And because we are in NATO right now, we are not living through some really dark times like Ukrainians are. So the only security guarantee that is really functioning is NATO and NATO membership. Of course, when the war is going on, I understand that many allies have, it is, one of the conditions or preconditions is that you don't have open conflicts. And Russia knows that very well. And if we somehow agree to these gray zones, then the gray zones are a source of conflict, are the source of wars, and it will not end. So the only functioning security guarantee is NATO membership.
And we'll come back to this question of NATO membership. High Representative, let me turn back to you now. Now, we've talked about economic reconstruction, we've talked about security guarantees. Of course, the other fundamental leg is Ukraine's democratic consolidation. And it's very clear that, I mean, this is, again, even in the best of circumstances, this is going to be a real challenge. I mean, to consolidate your democracy in a situation in which you're going to have an aggressive neighbor, again, even in the best of circumstances in which you liberate all your territory, and where economic reconstruction, precisely for that reason, will continue to remain a challenge, is not going to be easy. And of course, we don't have a silver bullet to this problem, but the closest we get to it is Ukraine's membership in the European Union. So could you perhaps give us your sense of where we are in this journey and whether you feel that there is a sufficient sense of urgency that this needs to happen and it has to happen fairly fast?
Well, first of all, let me say that I completely agree with the Estonian Prime Minister proposal, that we are working on that, and it will work, but quickly. Otherwise, the war will be over. Well, Ukraine belongs to the European Union family, and it will be a member of the European Union, definitely, after what has happened. After being bombed and after being killed by the Russians the way they are doing, the history is already there in the European Union. The future of Ukraine will be in the European Union. As other, this will oblige us to change our rules of procedure. This will change the size and the diversity of Europe, because if Ukraine becomes a member, many Balkan countries will do also, and first homework to change the way we work. Because I cannot imagine that passing from 27 to 36, no, 36 maybe not, but 33, could be possible with the rules in which we work and how we adopt decisions. So they have a homework, we have a homework. And they have a difficult homework because before the war, already Ukraine had a lot of problems. And we supported Ukraine. Before the war, we invested on the political and economic development of Ukraine 15,000 million euros. Well, with the war, we have invested 60 billion euros. But yes, Ukraine has to transform its structures, political structure, fight against corruption, and have real, truly democracy, a vibrant economy. All that being bombed, well, it's quite difficult. But they will do it because they want to do it quickly, and we have to accompany them. And the Commission is doing at a speed never seen before. Now it's done. Ukraine belongs to Europe. It could have been in a different way. But now it's done. Ukraine is a member of the European Union, European family, European culture, civilization, way of living, and this has to be institutionalized. They have to do their homework. We have to accompany them, and we have to prepare to receive Ukraine and others, like it or not.
Prime Minister, you had a remark on this question.
Yeah, just to add on that, I mean, as we have experience joining the European Union, and it is, I mean, also Europe's interest that that all these reforms are done. You know, free market, rule of law, getting rid of corruption, and there's a short opportunity window that we had after. You know, regaining independence, that, you know, every political force literally, you know, holds hands and says that, you know, we do these difficult reforms. Ukraine didn't do it in 1991. They didn't do the turnaround. But I can see that in Ukraine right now, there is this will, there is this hope, and there's the political will to really do the difficult reforms that we also need. So, so we have to use this opportunity window, because it will close after the war. It will close because, you know, the political infighting and everything will kick in. And that's why it's very important to give this hope, to actually believe in Ukraine that they can do it.
Indeed. Sure.
May I just add on to that, because I think the messages we send from European Union right now, they are really important. There is a framework right now. There will be some kind of what we call an oral report back on how the criteria are being fulfilled during the spring, and then will be the more formalized feedback process during the fall in terms of Ukraine. And obviously we have all heard the Ukrainian ambitions this year, or as President Zelensky said, 2023. So we shouldn't be able to misunderstand his point of view. But I think it's important now. I mean, everybody can agree on the key words merit-based. Nobody disagrees on that, because it's in a neutral way. It simply says you fulfill criteria, there are no shortcuts, you know, we take this seriously. Everybody agrees. There is sometimes also a way of saying merit-based is a way of saying don't rush into it. Be careful. Take it easy. And I don't really like the kind of the change in meaning of that. I think we need to be trustworthy in meaning what we are saying. It's merit-based, and we recognize merits. We help where we see problems, and don't accept the catch-22 kind of situation. I had a morning meeting with the Moldova president, Maya Sandu, and I mean, obviously they are being attacked by Russian influence and interest not to be able to fulfill these the obligations they try to fulfill to be able to have progress in the EU membership candidate status. So we also have to invest in helping legitimate governments in being able to actually reach their goals, to be able to use the possibilities that EU membership actually makes available.
Radek, I think, you know, what has emerged in a very powerful way up until now from all three speakers actually is that there is no such thing as the grey zone. There are no such things as buffer states anymore. We thought that they were. They're not. There are only frontier states. And you're either on one side of the frontier or on the other side of the frontier. And this obviously brings, you know, back this question both of EU enlargement and of NATO enlargement. Now, looking at both, and indeed, please do comment on both, but sort of zooming in on the EU enlargement point, and this goes back to the comments that the Prime Minister was making now. Of course, as we know, over the course of the last, certainly decade, this is a process that has been, on the one hand, hyper-politicized by specific member states that have slowed down this process. We started talking about it in terms of enlargement fatigue, and then all sorts of other considerations came in. And indeed, what was supposed to be a merit-based process, that merit became a sort of shifting goalpost, and it became an excuse for enlargement not to happen. So if you could perhaps comment firstly on this question of, do you feel that politically there is is the sense of enlargement has actually re-become a strategic imperative. I mean, is there this awareness that has consolidated amongst member states?
These questions of buffer states and frontline states is particularly dramatic for Poland. We are the only country in the EU and NATO which is a neighbor of both Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine has won the right to negotiate membership in the EU by its amazing sacrifice. I don't think it would be happening quite as fast if it wasn't for that. And my advice to them is don't think there will be shortcuts. You are not negotiating some kind of halfway deal between Ukraine and the EU. Ukraine has a body of laws accumulated over several decades that it will not change for you. You are actually acceding to that deal. And therefore, the faster you do it, the faster you translate EU legislation into Ukrainian and pass it in your parliament, the sooner you will become member. And I think that intellectual clarity about the nature of the process is important for the sake of negotiations, but also important to explain to your own people that you are adjusting to something that exists already. But I want to come back to the subject of the panel, which is there a possibility of return to security architecture in Europe? Now, the word architecture for me implies rules, aesthetic rules, Palladia, and building trade rules. If you break them, the house will be at least ugly, or it will collapse, as so tragically happened all over Turkey recently. And it also implies participation. Architecture cannot be imposed on your partners. And we do have, or we used to have, some common rules and organizations with Russia. First of all, the UN. And remember, Ukraine was a member of the UN in its internationally recognized border, even in Soviet times. But the Security Council of the UN was meant to be the guardian of peace, rather than an immunity for those who breach the peace and start a war of aggression. So Russia is clearly in breach here. Secondly, OSCE. Let's remember what the basic deal was between the East and West then, that the East would let up on the dissidents and the West would recognize the new post-war borders in Europe. Russia is in breach too. And thirdly, the Council of Europe, where we decided after World War II that the way to protect national minorities was the Council of Europe Convention on Minority Rights. Russia would have been perfectly in its right to say, we don't like this particular Ukrainian law on the language or the rights of Russian speakers in courts in Crimea. Fine, you can do that, but you mustn't invade. And so what I'm saying is that the problem with recovering a sense of order, of predictability, is the nature of the Russian regime, which has broken these rules. And so I don't think the architecture can be restored without change in Russia. And lastly, I agree with the High Representative that if Ukraine wins, and we do have a change, a transformation in Russia, that could possibly be a constitutional moment for the globe so that our institutions, such as the Security Council, start better reflecting the changed balance of power.
Radek, I mean, sort of back to this question, though, of enlargement. Enlargement needs to happen. It needs to happen fairly fast. I mean, as the Prime Minister was saying, you need to sort of catch that momentum. It's not going to last forever. On the other hand, we also know that even if all conditions are fulfilled, things can happen afterwards. yeah? Once you do enter the European Union. So perhaps flipping into the European Union in our discussion, you know, if you, on the one hand, need to accelerate an enlargement process, and on the other hand, you need to make sure that those democratic standards continue to be fulfilled once inside, what are the lessons that we should be drawing, and how is it that we have to start changing internally as well in order to make this happen?
Well, I keep telling the government of Poland, for which I didn't vote, that the best thing they could do for the membership of Ukraine is to fix our Polish problems with Brussels. Because we want Western Europeans to think that Ukraine will be a worthy and a useful member, rather than another large, poor, post-communist country with democracy and rule of law problems. But, you know, we are addressing it after the financial crisis, when it was discovered that some countries were breaking the rules of the Growth and Stability Pact. We've introduced the Fiscal Pact and a peer review of budgets and of financial credibility. And we are now doing it in the rule of law area as well. There is now a review process by the Commission of rule of law problems in all the member states. And only that needs to happen is that countries should just fulfill the recommendations and the deals that they have voluntarily agreed to.
Prime Minister, I know you wanted to react to some of these points, but let me also add another question concerning how is it that we have to change internally. I mean, if this is, again, there are no buffer states, there are frontier states, and so enlargement becomes a strategic priority, which obviously concerns Ukraine, but it doesn't concern only Ukraine. So here we have an enlargement process that expands considerably, at least potentially so. It is very clear that we also have to change our internal rules in all sorts of other ways. Given that I assume that your country would be in favor of that ongoing enlargement, would you also be in favor of a revision of those rules? I'm thinking obviously here about decision-making rules and in particular qualified majority.
Yeah. Before I answer that question, I wanted to react to what Radek said. You know, I'm listening to you, and this is. It seems to me that, you know, Russia is concerned about and is fighting for all the rights of Russians except in Russia. So this is very clear. But what I wanted to add is that in terms of what it really needs, in terms of looking around or rethinking the rules and institutions, like after the Second World War, the United Nations was created. Definitely we need to rethink now, but one part of it is accountability. And without it, we just can't do it. You know, yesterday we had discussions and you know, I hear that many countries except Ukraine have the fear of the nuclear escalation and so that we can't hold accountable Putin or Lavrov. You know, there's no international tribunal because otherwise, you know, it will be nuclear threat. But you know, it just can't be that those countries that have nuclear weapons are beyond the law, are beyond the rules. If it is so, we will have the pariah states that will use this because they know that nothing's going to happen to them. So accountability and not only the crimes, war crimes, but also leadership crime, which is the crime of aggression that can be only prosecuted by the special tribunal. And the leadership crime is the crime that all the other war crimes are stemming from. If you have no crime of aggression, you don't have war crimes either. But that's just a comment. Coming to your question, I mean, going back, you know, European enlargement, first it was 6 states and you know, every time it's the discussion that we can't work with a bigger group. And, you know, for a small country that didn't have a voice for 50 years, it is very important that we have a voice now, that we are actually listened to around that table. So when we hear the talks about, qualified majority, we hear that, okay, we are again in that threat that we don't have a voice. And that is the risk how we see it. If we have, and we have problems with, certain issues, so far we have managed to make decisions, even during this hard time of war this year, where we have been united and we have done the decisions, the necessary decisions. So I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, really, because it has so many, positive sides for countries like mine, small countries that didn't have a voice when we were occupied.
I see that. I also see the way in which other member states have been using and abusing this.
I see that, and we have to, of course, discuss this, how we can, use some tools so that if you do this, then, there are consequences. So you have to really make the calculations there. But it's just giving that, there's a qualified majority and we will do those decisions without you will just mean that you will leave out part of Europe. And that would actually also create instability if everybody does not have a say.
But I guess there are constant trade-offs, and I basically agree. But on the other hand, if you start at the end, what do we have to be able to do? And I would say two things, and I realize every member state doesn't agree with that. The first is actually how to cultivate the transatlantic relations. I mean, have a decision-making process that makes the European Union compatible with the US in the long run. I think that's extremely important. I think nothing has shown that more the last year than the war in Ukraine. So every tendency to say that without neglecting at all the integrity of Europe, every tendency to say, well, this shows that we can make it on our own. I think that's simply not correct. So the other one is actually to be able to face China, basically. And a lot of different, very legitimate views on that. But we need to be able to cooperate on how to meet, react to, face, contradict China, and according to me, do that hand in hand with the US. Because otherwise we will have a very complicated world where the US has one position, the EU tries to find one position, and China will try to outsmart us. So I think it's extremely important to understand what is the purpose of what we're doing in a broader geopolitical context.
But back to this question of, so, here we are, we all love enlargement, great, but not everyone wants to enlarge. So there are a number of very important European countries that prefer staying outside. So perhaps, Prime Minister, could you give us your sense of, I'm obviously here talking about the Norway, Turkey's, United Kingdoms of this world. Now here we have a European political community. Could you give us your sense of how much value added can such a forum actually provide?
Honestly, hard to say, I would say. On the other hand, let's test it in later this spring. I mean, if you ask our Moldovan friends, they would say it's of huge importance. Obviously, it's a framework for cooperating with countries that are in different ways very nearby us in geographic sense, but also in terms of ambitions. So we actually literally discussed that the upcoming meeting in Moldova, and for them it's of huge importance. And I think it's a way of signaling also our, without any promises ahead, but of course, and it's very different. It's a way of also having extremely close connections with other countries. That I mean, obviously the UK and Moldova are in different positions, but the EU needs to have organized ways to cooperate with countries that are very close to us.
High Representative, let's turn now to the question of European defence. Now, I think this last year has, in many respects, kind of really highlighted a contradiction. So, on the one hand, we take defense more seriously. And European defense, and you highlighted this, has actually made some pretty remarkable steps forward over the last year. On the other hand, we still have a major problem when it comes to defense fragmentation, and the steps forward that have been made in that respect are not particularly impressive. On top of that, you could also make the argument that actually the last year, and this goes to also the transatlantic dimension to all of this, over the last year, our defense dependence on the United States has massively increased. So here we are, on the one hand, taking defense more seriously, and European defense more seriously. On the other hand, our dependence on the United States increasing, and this doesn't particularly make for a great recipe for the future of the transatlantic relationship, where I think there's interest actually on both sides of a more balanced partnership. So how do we kind of reconcile that contradiction? That's an easy question.
That's a cosmic question. Look, there's nothing new. NATO is the guarantee of territorial defense of Europe. It has been, it is, it will be. And nobody pretends to substitute the NATO. NATO is the alliance that ensures territorial defense of Europe. It doesn't prevent the European member states to develop capacities in order to, first, be a better partner of NATO, and second, to have the capacity to act by themselves when needed. They are not either or. It's not NATO or European defense. It's NATO guarantee, as you said, of the territorial defense of Europe, plus member states taken seriously, not more seriously, seriously, because in the past they haven't taken seriously what does it mean to be an independent state and to have defense capabilities. Since the Euro crisis, Europe has been living a long process of disarmament. We have disarmed. Peace and economic crisis makes military expenditure the variable of budget adjustment. And that's why we don't have stockpiles, because the military was the adjustment variable. Less expenditure, less military expenditure. We don't need it. We don't need it. There is no war in our borders. Yes, we send some expedition in the Sahel and other parts of Africa. Yes, we use some rapid and chirurgical military intervention like in Libya. But a high-intensity war, interstate war, mobilizing thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, and using capacities that are cheap and can be destroyed, a lot of them every day, it was out of our imagination. Now it's part of our reality. So, good news, we are increasing this capacity. Germany, I don't know when, but 100,000 million euros. Poland, increasing to 4 points of GDP, double of NATO standards. Poland is increasing their military capacity as anyone in Europe. But have a look at France. When I look at the new law for military financing in France, they go from 39 to 59 billion. That's an increase of 40%. Maybe they don't tell that very loudly, but this is an increase of 40%, 40% on the military expenditure of France. So France, Germany, Poland, and others. It is the clear feeling that we need to rearm. I'm sorry. When I'm saying that, people tell me, oh, you want to militarize Europe. No, I want Europe to be able to fulfill their responsibilities. Inside NATO, first, and when NATO will not act, be able to react when needed. And I insist, it's not either or. It's NATO plus European capacities to increase the strength of NATO and to be able to be a reliable and powerful partner. And this is the duty of the High Rep, not only for foreign policy, but for security and defense, Don't forget it. And that's why on the next defense ministers in Sweden, on the 6th and 7th of March, will be put on the table. We are in war mode, urgent war mode. So react quickly. We have the means and tools. And at the end, you know, we talk about reconstruction of Ukraine, which is the PIB, the GNP of Ukraine, 150 billions. 150 billions. Let's suppose a capital income ratio of 1/3, and let's suppose that the capital of Ukraine has been destroyed by 1/3. We are still on 150 billion for reconstruction. This is one-fifth of the next generation plan. This is 1/5 of what we have mobilized to face the COVID. So please have an idea of the dimensions of the problem in order to see what we are talking about. So if the Europeans want, they can rearm. And by the way, my figures, coming from the work of the European Defence Agency, my figure says that in the next 2 years, the European member states plan to spend 70 billion more for their capacities. Which is the problem, my dear Nathalie? That if we do it, everyone on each corner, multiplying by X its own capacities, without any kind of coordination, we will increase our duplicities and we will not fill in our loopholes. So spend more, it's on the way. Spend better by spending together, still not. And it's not just buying ammunition altogether, that's quite easy. The important thing is to decrease the number of different tools that our armies have and make them more interoperable. And this is a task that was, yes, okay, agreed on the books, and now it has to be a priority of the European Union. A priority. If not, we are going to waste a lot of taxpayer money.
I agree. Radek, I know you wanted to react on this, and perhaps on top of that, before we open up to the floor, if I could just ask you a final question also, I mean, about one thing that we, oddly, haven't actually talked about very much, which is our relationship with Russia. You know, sort of having a whole discussion on the future European security architecture without addressing this question. And of course, there's an obvious reason why we're not addressing it. We don't really know what Russia we're talking about. But perhaps, again, before we open it up to the floor, alongside reacting to anything you want to react to, if you could perhaps comment on that question as well.
Sure. We had a process of negotiating a partnership and cooperation agreement with Russia. There was a mandate for the Commission. And it was pretty detailed and pretty advanced. We could have had an association agreement with Ukraine and an association agreement with Russia. It was Russia that decided she was no longer interested. In, I think, 2011, Vladimir Putin decided that he would build an alternative, rival, Euro-Asiatic Union that will then negotiate with Brussels as an equal. And he needed Ukraine in his multinational project. So this was Russia's decision, and Russia can change its decision. Of course, not the current one, not the current leadership, because with them you can't make a deal because they're completely non-credible. But on European defense, I've lost my voice asking the question in the European Parliament, what has to happen in the periphery of Europe for you to take defense seriously? And there's a history to it. You know, after the Balkan Wars, we pledged ourselves to have a rapid reaction force. I think it was meant to be 70,000 troops. Nothing happened. Then we had the battle groups. Useless. Now at least we have a budget. It's wonderfully called Peace Facility, from which we are actually buying arms for Ukraine. Good. Thank you, High Rep, for noticing that Poland is basically doubling its defense expenditure, but this is really unfair. So Poland is going to be defending much richer countries further west that are spending much less. So spending some of that money through the European budget, to which we contribute in proportion to GDP, would be fairer. And Americans should be really pleased if we do that, because they have a challenge elsewhere. And if we can deal with lower order threats in North Africa, or perhaps, I don't want to speculate, but lower order threats on our own, that's good. That helps to relieve some of the burden that they have. But we need to get serious. It takes money. Without the pandemic, the European defense budget would have been 14 billion euros instead of 7. But it's still not enough. I mean, defense is really expensive. And also, we have misconstrued PESCO. Originally, when Bernard Kouchner and I signed the first letter to Cathy Ashton at my house in Poland, it was meant to be an avant-garde project only for countries that are really willing to do that, with joint rules of engagement, with a joint command, with a joint threat assessment. And it's become a political project at the lowest speed. But this was before the war. We now have to get real. We really need to go over to wartime leadership, because these things take a decade to construct defense capabilities. If we don't start right now, we will still be defenseless in 10 years' time.
Okay, let's open this up. Question over here.
Thank you very much, Alexei Goncharenko, member of the Parliament of Ukraine. I want to continue your line, and I have a question to High Representative Borell and Prime Minister Kallas. My question is about Russia. And the question is, we are speaking now about European architecture of security. But if Russia as empire still exists, it will be like a fortress, under walls of which at the gates is staying barbarians. So the question is not just to defeat Russia today, but to de-imperialize Russia, to change Russia. And that is possible. Like we saw it in history. Spanish Empire does not exist anymore. Austro-Hungarian Empire also. Who benefited is here in Munich, I think that's the best place to speak about it. Who benefited more than Germans in the fact that now German Empire does not exist, but there is free, wonderful country. So is this, does Europe need policy to de-imperialize Russia, not just to change Putin's regime, to de-imperialize Russia, to change it in order to really have a secure Europe? Thank you.
The question that needs to be addressed is the accountability regarding Russia as well. I mean, as after the Second World War, there was a Nuremberg Tribunal and there was a Tokyo Tribunal. The Nazi crimes were widely condemned across the world. And the effect of the Nuremberg Tribunal was that actually German people got to know about the crimes that the Nazis committed. And hence, you know, there is the change in mindset. There has been no such thing in Russia. So they are defining themselves through the empire, really, being the masters of that empire. And if people admire dictators, there is no obstacle in becoming one or submitting to one. So how to really, you know, tackle that cycle is that history matters. I mean, our history books were rewritten after we regained our independence to reflect all the crimes that were committed. It was not the same for Russia. They are teaching and learning from the Soviet history books. So the accountability is of utmost importance for the crimes of aggression, really to have, you know, the understanding also within Russian society and also maybe the contemplation there. Without it, I don't think it's possible.
Question here in the third row. Oh, sorry, High Representative.
Look, this is still a deep socio-cultural question. Russia will not disappear, but it may change. Which Russia? Putin's Russia? Which Russia? Russia that win the war, occupy Kiev and make Ukraine a second Belarus? Or a Russia that is being defeated and maybe there could be internal political changes? I don't know. But I can say the same thing about US. Which US? Biden US or Trump US? What would have happened with Trump in the White House? Would be in the same situation? No. So US, Russia, which US and which Russia? It's very premature to start thinking on the security architecture of Europe when we are in the middle of the war. And depending on the result of the war, the situation will be completely different. So let's concentrate our efforts on winning this war, keeping the door open to peace at any moment.
Yeah, but it goes, parallelly. If we think that let's concentrate on the war and not think about what comes after, then when the war is over, nobody talks about accountability anymore because it's done, let's move on, and then it would just repeat itself all over again. We have seen this in history. So we have to do it parallel. We have to talk about the accountability now. We have to work with the accountability now so that we would have sustainable peace in the future, that the imperialistic dreams that the Russians have, and I'm not talking about Putin, not Putin, it's the nation and what is in it. I mean, what are they celebrating really? Being the empire or not? Really, we have to cut the cycle.
All these historical parallels, they always kind of end up in a dead end. But everybody says, China, for example. No chance that China will become a liberal democracy. Well, you can argue that. Well, what happened with Japan? What happened with South Korea? It's very possible, actually, to create stable, well-working democracies. You have to have a long-term view, but a very practical approach in the short run, I think.
Question here in the third row.
Hello. Yeah. Yep. Thank you, Alexander Nelyuk. It was for the last 3 days, lots was said about supporting Ukraine. I actually was with the army since the first day of the war, and only recently left it. So allow me to make a very brief intervention as well before you ask a question. But of course, I would like to thank you for your support. I know what it means to start the war with Kalashnikov in your hand and see how your capability is improving with every month when you receive support from our Western partners. So thank you for that. I also happened to be a Minister of Finance during the war since 2015. And I can tell you that it was very, very difficult, the National Security Chief. We were spending for our defense up to 6% of our GDP. It was very, very difficult. It's thought so expensive. But I felt that we ran out of time. We need to prepare. So I hear also a lot during this conference that it is expensive to support Ukraine. But I think the right approach to it, Ukraine spent 6%, it was a lot. Now it's about 60%. So in order to spend 60%, right, it's better to pay now more. And I'm glad that, the rearmament and there is some voices that we need to, you need actually to invest more into this. So, and European Union has this advantage. NATO allows to share expenses. We couldn't do it. So second, it was a point about Ukraine, what's going to happen after, right? And whether it's the time for reforms now or after. I believe there will be a very short window for reforms after the war, but now it is open. We're not Moldova. Russia is not intervening, blocking anything. It's time now to change Ukraine, the best time now for this. And the last one about security guarantees. Look, also there were some fears that Russia may break up and that creates enormous risk for everyone. First of all, don't you think that you control this? Russia is unpredictable. Something may change there without you willing or not willing. It's uncontrollable. So I think if Putin believes that you want to use this argument that, look, if I'm not there, it will be a mess in Russia. It will be a leverage over Europe, over NATO. So I think NATO needs to accept this and accept it as a reality, and then plan accordingly. Are you up to the task? Are you ready for that or not? And last thing about purses and tranches, the best security guarantee for a person who was on the front line is, paraphrasing Marcus Cato, Russia delenda est.
Now, let me start actually taking more questions, because I've got many. I'm going to try and bring in as many people as possible. Question 2 rows back.
My name is Hans Atzbodin, Managing Director of the Federation of German Defense, Security and Defense Industry. I have a question to the High Representative. You impressively argued in favor of a strong defense industry in Europe. Thank you. However, at the same time, the EU Commission is driving a Green Deal which is employing financial market actors as transformation agents. And there in the financial market, sustainability is widely perceived as being in contradiction to armament and weapons. So, for example, the State Bank of Bavaria has cancelled business relationship with armament companies just because they had more than 20% turnover in armaments, even supplying the Bundeswehr, our armed forces. So my question is, what will and when will the EU Commission finally give a strong signal to those financial actors that they perceive armament for our armed forces in the EU and NATO as prerequisite for sustainability? Thank you.
I will pass your question to my colleagues in the Commission. I think it's perfectly right what we are saying. On that day, I've been talking with many people of the defense industry, asking for this taxonomy to be built in order to take into account that the defense industry, it's an important part of our political sustainability. And thanks God, remember that the proposal of putting the defense industry as a non-sustainable, in a negative level inside the taxonomy. This was avoided. But certainly we have to review the way we see at the defense industry.
Yeah, and the kind of right needs to know what the left hand is doing, right?
In Sweden, we had a very short-lived discussion in Sweden on how to exclude defense industry investments from sustainability. That discussion died at 24th of February.
And there's one more issue. You know, some politicians are telling us that, yes, we need more ammunition, we need more equipment, but there are these procedures. Don't believe it. As defense minister, I bought plenty of equipment, plenty of ammunition. I believe every country in Europe has a clause that if you have an urgent operational need, you can do it without tenders. You can just go and buy it and give the contracts. What is more urgent operationally than winning the war in Ukraine?
Absolutely, absolutely. There was a question at the back there. Yeah, lady at the back.
Thank you. My name is Lisa Jasko, member of Ukraine Parliament. And I want to reflect on what I just heard about Ukraine membership in the EU. You know, when I hear that the President Zelensky said it should be 2023 and the reflection from and the conclusion from the EU, I want to tell you that it's not the President Zelensky position only. He speaks the majority of the voice of Ukrainian people. And Ukrainian people don't understand that there are procedures. They don't understand that there are chapters and rules. You know, today it's 2023, but 9 years ago it was 2014. And I, together with thousands of Ukrainians, we were standing at Euromaidan. And now we sometimes even don't remember that. In my life, I'm 32. I already had 3 revolutions for the European values. And I'm saying this today because I'm very happy when the Radek Sikorski says that when there is urgency for defense, we can do this even sometimes without procedures. But there should be something similar on the EU membership also for Ukraine, because Ukrainian people know that we are a part of Europe and they will not understand when in some of the conclusions there will be, I don't know, chapters of different rules. Please, let's make that special procedure. Let's make it fast, because this is something that Ukrainian people are fighting for many, many years. And for us, it's not economic cooperation. It's our existential choice that we made a long time ago, not this year or during the war. And I want you to remember that. Thank you.
We'll go back to this question of should we have a special procedure for Ukraine, but let me go to John exactly here at front row.
John Chipman of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, so I have what the French call a déformation professionnelle. I was just speaking to nuestro amigo Javier Solana here about this strategic issue. We've talked about European security architecture and European military capacities, but insufficiently about reviving a properly strategic culture. In the Cold War, we had two principles in NATO. One was flexible response, the other was escalation dominance. In this conflict, we've seen sequential response and intramural escalation fear. We have talked more about how frightened we might be about escalation than put in the mind of the opponent in Moscow a greater fear of escalation. It's been strategically illiterate, our intramural dialogue these last 11 months. Defense is not escalation. Offensive weapons are needed for counterattack. Counterattack is needed for defense. Ukraine has a UN Article 51 right to defend itself. Everyone else has the same UN Article 51 right to assist it. Ukraine's non-membership of NATO is strategically irrelevant. The European security order has been challenged, like the Middle East one was challenged when Iraq invaded Kuwait. Kuwait had no defense agreement with any one of the 50-plus countries that came to Kuwait. People came to Kuwait because they knew the next stop might be Saudi Arabia, and that would be the end of whatever Middle East security order lies. So can I appeal to Prime Minister Kazakallas and others, including Radek, to continue to remind people that there are some lessons from the Cold War that we've properly forgotten, and others, strategic muscle memory, that we haven't sufficiently revived. Let's have strategic thinking as well as debate.
Thomas Silves, mic over here.
Thomas Silves, former president of Estonia and various other things. I'd ask the participants to explain their personal belief in how serious the European Union is about enlargement to Ukraine, given that we have heard here and for a long time, on the one hand, that East Europeans are hawks, warmongers from Western Europeans, and then we hear, on the other hand, that we have to take into account the historical experiences of the global South. But we have the historical experiences of the mother of the Prime Minister of Estonia, who was deported as a 6-month-old, but we don't want to hear the historical experiences of the Poles, the Estonians. Is the European really serious about bringing in another 44 million people who have had experiences with the behavior of Russia, when we hear from the same podium and have heard throughout the past year about how the East Europeans are hawks and warmongers? I mean, are you serious? That's my question. Are you serious that the European Union really wants to include more of us who have had empirical experience with Russia to actually prick the balloon of belief about Druzhba Narodov and the wonderful culture of Tolstoy and Dostoevsky?
So, Josep, are we serious? And if we are serious, are we ready to rethink our procedures in order to demonstrate our seriousness?
Well, I didn't know it was going to be a debate about enlargement. I was prepared to discuss about the security, architecture, the geopolitical Europe, and about how to face the war. About enlargement, I have nothing more to say than what the European leaders at the highest possible level have said. President of the Commission, President of the European Council, and all leaders of the European Union member states. What can I add? They said clearly, they engaged, they did the procedures as quick as possible. The procedures are still there. Don't imagine a system without procedures. They are there, they have to be fulfilled. It's not my specialty, the rules and ways of the enlargement, but all European leaders here and out of this room have been saying once and again that Ukraine and Moldova and later Georgia will be members of the European Union, and the process is open. But don't expect it to be done overnight without any kind of fulfilling some requirements.
And in fact, part of the point is actually that if those requirements are met, then there is that democratic consolidation, which is kind of the purpose of the whole exercise, right? Radek, you had a point on this.
This is a wonderful moment, and thank you, Thomas, because a year ago, exactly, here, us, supposed hawks, were saying he's going in. And the supposed realists were saying he's bluffing. Well, who was right? And what we require is A, don't patronize us anymore, and B, since you didn't listen to us when we were saying it before, listen to us now. On enlargement, this is going to be interesting and difficult because there is pressure from below, from the populations to do it. But of course, including Ukraine will lower the average wealth in the European Union. So some countries will become net contributors earlier, for example, Poland, and we don't mind. But it will also change the balance of power inside the European Union. Ukraine will have 60 MEPs. The European Union will be rebalanced. Not everybody will welcome that. And the question of timing is, of course, very interesting. We have two distinguished Spaniards here. Am I right in remembering that Spain was the last country that was admitted into the EU first and then had a transition period to accept the acquis communautaire, right? And then Sweden already had to do the pre-accession. But you know, we could make an exception and go to the previous system, have a political membership first, and then open one area of integration after another at a pace that both Ukraine and Europe can sustain. It would only take a will.
I want to take two final questions. There's Charles Grant, who's been very patient there at the back.
No?
Oh, yeah, I can't. Yep, Charles.
Charles Grant, Centre for European Reform in London. We haven't talked very much about the old French concept of strategic autonomy in the area of defence today. It's not such a popular idea now, I gather, particularly in places like the Baltic countries and Poland, obviously in the light of the war, given the incredible importance of the US defence link now. But my question is this: if somebody like Donald Trump or somebody close to him comes back to being president of the United States again, are the Europeans going to start talking about European strategic autonomy again in the area of defence? And linked to that, if they do start to talk about strategic autonomy, will they think that the British need to be part of it to make it a stronger and more effective strategic autonomy?
Thank you, Charles. There was a hand there at the back, but I don't... yeah, there you are. Exactly.
Thank you, Natalie. Hannah Neumann, member of the Defence Committee of the European Parliament. So please allow me to take the discussion also back to the issue of EU defence. Because despite the Russian aggression, I feel like we are stuck in a Groundhog Day discussion here. We are talking European strategic autonomy, European sovereignty for 5-6 years. After the Russian aggression, European Defence Agency wanted to check on the member states' capability gaps that they were supposed to report to the European Union, just to find out almost none did. Now you are sharing, and I share this assessment, Mr. Borell, that the member states are growing their defence budgets, yes, but they are still not coordinating on EU level. So they will spend side by side, they will even run into competition and pay more for less that they get. So what does it need? And we have, two people from the member states also on the podium. If the Russian aggression is not enough, what does it need for us to really work on EU defence, which means giving up national sovereignty and moving it to the EU level and not just talk?
Yeah.
So, very final comments from our panel. Let me just take it in turn. Radek, let me start with you.
Well, I couldn't agree more with the speaker. We are past the hour. We are behind the curve. Ursula von der Leyen, in one of her State of the Union speeches, asked the member states, do you want to get serious about defense? Really, it's the Council, it's the member states that have to make the transition get serious and get it done.
High Representative.
I agree, but between saying and doing, there is a little difference. Defense becomes a competence of the member states. Defense has not been communitarized. It's not a community competence. Let's remember that. We at the Commission, we can claim whatever we want, but defense is a member state competence. We can push, we can support, but at the end, it's the Council, the member state decision. And yes, we have to push for it, and we do, and we advance, but miracles doesn't exist. So if you believe that tomorrow all member states will agree on a common defense investment, sorry, it's not going to happen. But we can do, step by step, a better integration, coordination, interoperability of our arms. And that's what we are doing. And we have a lot of work done. Don't dismiss the work that has been done, but don't ask for miracles. Defense remains a strong dimension of the national sovereignty. And the armies are powerful tools with identities, and to make them to become a single one working in accordance with rules coming from a kind of a community is not going to happen tomorrow. But we can do a lot in order to make them spend better by spending together in several fields. It's a long process. The war in Ukraine is certainly a big incentive. Europe is being done on the crisis. That's right. And this crisis will make us to react and to assume our responsibility, because strategic autonomy, no need because NATO's there. No, NATO is there. It will be there is something that we need and nobody's questioning. But this war has to represent an awakening for the member states to spend better, to spend more, to have more military capabilities, more interoperable, being a stronger part of NATO, and being stronger in order to work when NATO will not be there. So this is something that we have to claim once and again. This is a crisis, this is an opportunity. We have to break taboos. We broke a lot. Who could have said before the war that the European Union would be spending European money altogether to give arms to a country being attacked? Frankly, don't be so pessimistic and so negative. There is a lot of work to do, but we have doing a lot, and we will do much more, because this war will be a big incentive for doing that.
Prime Minister Christoph.
Well, I think the last year has kind of taught us that the most relevant version of, so to speak, strategic autonomy is actually for European countries to invest more in our own country's defense, and thereby show the Americans that we are really partners in this. I think that's the most obvious lesson learned in terms of autonomy, that is cooperation.
Thank you. Prime Minister Clemens.
Yeah, I have a few points also on other topics. On strategic autonomy, I agree that first we should all meet and really do in actual deeds, investing the 2%. The 2% of our GDP should be absolute minimum. So when those who are talking about it should also show it not in words but actually in deeds, that we raise our autonomy by being more able to defend also ourselves, and that requires investment to defense. Regarding the accession process, there is this set of reforms that is required, and it is also the basis of prosperity. I mean, free market, rule of law, to make investors trust your economy, your system, and then it is also necessary to do those reforms so that the country could develop to the level where the other countries are, and there is a convergence between the countries that already are in European Union and whose GDP and well-being of people is better. So it is needed for both sides, but also for the European side. It's a bit, we hear that, you know, it's necessary for Ukraine, but it's actually also necessary for us that our, you know, internal market is bigger, then the whole region is more secure because it's dependent on the fundamental values that we share. And what Thomas asked, yes, I remember the 24th of February very well, when we had the meeting also with other prime ministers who were quite shocked. I heard so many times that we were naive, we should have listened to you. And now I hear this, that okay, you know, we are the adults in the room. I mean, not we, but again, those countries who said that we were naive and should have listened to you, we know better now. And my question is, why do you think you know better now when you didn't know before? And why do we really try to use the same, you know, track that was used before that didn't work? We have, you know, every next time Russia takes a bolder step, every next time it's bigger. So we have to cut the cycle. And I really, really plead that we are being listened to, because I know not many European countries understand that we all have our skin in the game, but some of us more than the others. And if I hear from countries that have much better neighbors than we do, and that they are afraid of the nuclear escalation, I mean, believe me, if there is nuclear escalation, it will be on Ukraine, it will be on those countries and not countries in the middle of Europe. So if they are not afraid, so shouldn't be Germany, France, other countries that are really, really much further away from this war. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Prime Minister. Thank you to all panelists. I think the bottom line to this last hour and a half has been, if you're serious about the long term, be it in terms of security, of the economy, of democracy, there has to be a far, far greater urgency now. So thank you very much for this great discussion. Thank you for the great questions.
You're watching BR24 live, covering this year's Munich Security Conference. And we've had him for the past 2 days, and of course we're having him for the third day as well. Clemens Verenkotte, our former correspondent for the Southeast Europe and the US. Clemens, happy to see you again, and let's start with a bold question, shall we? If Europe wants to be serious about security and defense, does Europe need a joint army?
Probably there will not have a European army, but the basic question was really who is securing European security. And what we heard, not only this morning, but also over the course of the last 2-3 days, was that's NATO, just NATO. For example, we had the Swedish Prime Minister on stage right now. Sweden, as we all know, together with Finland, are applying for NATO membership, which is blocked right now by Turkey and Hungary. And the Swedish Prime Minister was completely clear in saying, well, it's just NATO. Even the chief foreign policy Commissioner Borell also getting to the question, who is securing our European security in the first place, is that it's NATO. NATO is the guarantee for the territorial integrity. And then in the second step, we're saying each member state has really to push up, especially spending, defense spending, and getting together their act in terms of common ammunition orders and something like this, which we had been talking about for years and years and years. And mentioning the last item from the Estonian Prime Minister, she was saying, well, we are also EU members and NATO members, but we have so-called bad neighbors, referring to Russia. So he's saying this is extremely important that we learn lessons, and we just wasted time again and again, even after 2014 when Russia was invading the Crimea and the part of Donbass, that we didn't act fast enough. And last word in terms of the urgency, I mean, I'm quoting Mr. Borell, the foreign policy chief, was saying, we are in war mood, we are in urgent war mood.
Russia's war has shown, and of course, as you mentioned already, invading Crimea in 2014, that military deterrence is more necessary than Europe and the European Union might have thought for the past few years. And so is military rearmament. How hard is it for Europe to adapt now?
Extremely difficult, because they didn't think of resupplying their armament and their stocks at all. Borell was saying prior to February 24th last year, they were all thinking, well, it's fine, we have some kind of interventions in Western Africa and other parts of the world, but not a full-fledged continental war. And so far, they looked at the stocks right now, which are really emptying the fast space, and now thinking of who can provide us with this kind of ammunition and armament, and for sure the defense industry. And defense industry, they always blame them. They say, well, they will actually just wait for this. What they are waiting for, this defense industry, is for strict orders in terms of we buy a special amount of ammunition for the next 5 to 10 years. The Estonian Prime Minister, Kallas, she had proposed a plan for the European Union member states to get a so-called common implementation to buy and order armament and ammunition. And Josep Borell, the chief foreign policy chief of the EU, was saying that's a very good idea. I will stress this, and they will meet again in early March with the meeting of the EU defense ministers and NATO defense ministers.
Natalie Tocci, who was hosting this discussion, said in the beginning there are 3 outcomes of this war. Ukraine wins, Russia wins, or it's turning into a, let's call it a forever war, so that there will always be conflict. Would a forever war even be worse for the European security?
I mean, I think what most participants here have come to terms is that the length of the war is something which are really keeping them much more in mind. What do I mean with this? They think of prolonging the weapon supply, ammunition supply to Ukraine for the long haul. Thinking of what kind of armament the Ukrainian army has to have in 2027. So we are looking at a very long time, and I think also the EU member states will increase immensely. The 2% quota for GNP and defense spending is, as the Estonian Prime Minister just said, the minimum, and also the German Minister of Defense, Pistorius, was also mentioning 2 is not enough, but giving also an example like France, increasing by 40% from this year to next year's budget. And also, it's a very national decision of EU member states how much money they will spend in the budget for defense. But I think in the meantime, it's clear they go for a long haul and they have to increase quite drastically.
Especially in Europe, people do have hopes for peace once this war is over, meaning that the world will be at peace again. With China on the horizon, is that naive?
Yes, I would say so, because if you really have to talk about, and they did it here over the course of the last 3 days, what does peace mean? Does peace mean we use a frozen conflict like we had since 2014? Or so the Russian empire, so to speak, will just include its territory to the 4 oblasts of Ukraine, and then this is it, and we'll wait for another year or two to regroup, and then it starts all over again? Or is it a restoration of full territorial integrity of Ukraine, which had been really reiterated by the Ukrainian foreign minister yesterday again? So the question is, what does peace mean? Is it exactly something which goes for the upholding of rule of law and accountability? Then that is something which is important. Going back to China, the chief foreign policy politician of China, Wang, and yesterday was U.S. Foreign Secretary Blinken, they had a meeting here without any cameras, nothing there. But what the American side, and especially Blinken, was afterwards saying, they had a very straightforward and very controversial talk, also about the question of, is China providing Russia with weapons and ammunitions? And for the U.S. administration was something was saying, this is crossing a red line and this has consequences. And so going back, we don't know what kind of proposal the Chinese government will put on the table, probably next week. So at the moment, we don't know what we're talking about.
Thank you so much, Clemens, for now, and I will be seeing you again in just an instant for the summary of the Munich Security Conference. Yes, there isn't much left on the agenda. Up next, a dream come due towards European strategic sovereignty, a panel discussion with, among others, Alexander De Croo, Belgium's Prime Minister, and Lars Klingbeil, co-chairman of Germany's Social Democratic Party. You're watching BR24 Live, and we'll be right back after this. Here we go again, BR24 live on the Munich Security Conference, day 3. Up next, a dream come due towards European strategic sovereignty. A panel discussion. Enjoy.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for this closing session that I hope will continue on the preceding conversation. I am delighted to be chairing this panel in Germany, where we at the IISS have a very big office in Berlin in Breitzer Platz, because of course the issue of European security is of great interest to us. Please help me in welcoming our esteemed panelists. We are starting with the Prime Minister of Lithuania, Ingrida Šimonytė. Hello. The Vice President of the Council of Ministers and Foreign Minister of Italy, Antonio Tajani. Co-chairman of the SPD in Germany, Lars Klingbeil. And member of the French Parliament and spokesperson for Renaissance, Benjamin Haddad. I'd like to get right down to business. We are going to do 45 minutes of questions here, and then I'll open it up to the public. I'll start with a question to all panelists, and I'll start with you, Prime Minister. In your view, what should be the 3 goals of European strategic sovereignty?
Well, I think the major thing to start from is to understand what this sovereignty is from. And I think sometimes we hear the confusing messages like, like European unity or European Union can sustain it on its own, being somehow sovereign from other democracies and other like-minded countries. So I think the understanding should be that this is a supplementary or complementary to transatlantic unity. And I would say that given the world is not experiencing the excess of democratic countries at the moment, unfortunately, there is no potential and no rationale for democratic countries to do anything else but stick around the same ideas, because we share the same values. So this is the most important thing. Now, if we speak about the security and safety, then I would say that the transatlantic bond is something that is absolutely crucial, and we should not fool ourselves that this can be somehow done other way around. But Europe, for a very long period, has been behind the sort of realistic evaluation, investment, and preparation for a situation that is as bad as the war in Ukraine now. So I think the Zeitenwende that has been declared should be real. We should foot the words with the funds. We should send the right signals to the industry in Europe that would be able to match the funds. And we should build that other leg of transatlantic bridge as strong as it can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Foreign Minister.
Good morning, everybody. But there are, for me, 3 points: security, stability, growth. Security is to protect our borders, the East and the South, because there are also a lot of problems on immigration, illegal immigration. The situation in Tunisia in this moment is very dangerous. For this, we need to pay attention also in this sector. Security is also the stability of the Western Balkans, because we are close to this European region, and there are a lot of countries candidate as member of the European Union. For this, we need to work hard also in this sector. The security is also our engagement against the terrorism. ISIS and Daesh are not sleeping. ISIS is present in Iraq. Al-Qaeda is working hard in sub-Saharan region. In the Horn of Africa, there are also the terrorism. For this, we need to work also on this. The protection of the border on the west is also the strategy, an European strategy with the Americans, with the United Nations. We are two faces of the same coin, Europe and America. We need to work very well in NATO. Europe is the future for every member state. And for achieving this goal of the stronger union, I am in favor of federation as the United States of America, more or less. But we need the unity among the European Union. We need to be united, as we are united now, in defense of the rule of law, in defense of the human rights, in defense of the international law. Example, the invasion of Ukraine is an action against the international law. And we want the respect of the international law. This position is very clear for everybody. But we want to achieve peace. But it's impossible to achieve peace without justice. Justice is, I want to be very frank, independence of Ukraine and integrity of Ukraine. But also unity is crucial if we want to pave the way for a stronger Europe among NATO and Europe more present in Africa. Look at Africa. To look at Africa is crucial for the future. To leave Africa in Chinese hands is a big mistake for everybody here. Also for our growth. Italy with Germany are the most important industrial countries in Europe. In Italy, there are 4 million of small and medium-sized companies. For us, it's crucial to protect this network. But for doing it, we need to work hard against climate change, for better companies, to reduce the emissions of CO2. But we need also to work together with the Europeans, but also with the Americans and with Japan, in one key point sector, raw materials, rare earth, are 2 key sectors for the defense of our companies. It's crucial for growth. And then we need to work all together. Unity, the 3 points are more or less different phases of the same problem, the same unity. Growth is also to work in space sector, is very crucial, is very important for everybody. Also, if you want a cleaner industry, we need to work with space. It's crucial, but we need to work together with the Americans, because for us, Europe is the first point for the Italian foreign policy, but the other key points are the transatlantic relations. We are part of this part of the world. It's impossible to change. I want to be very clear. Is Europe, Italy is with Europe, is with the United States of America, with NATO.
Thank you. Lars Klingbeil.
So, I mean, you asked for the 3 main key points from my perspective on European sovereignty, and I would say the first one is security and defense. And 2022 was a year where we all focused on our national security and national defense industry, and I think this year must be the year of European defense policy and European defense industry. And so we have to do more, we have to spend more money, we have to build capabilities, we have to focus on a European strategy, and we have to to focus on some political points. Maybe we'll debate them later here also on the stage. The second point I see is the question of economic resilience. And I try to debate a lot with the friends from America about the question of Inflation Reduction Act here on the Security Conference, because I think there's a link between the question of security and the question of economic resilience. And we've seen in the pandemic, also in the war here in Germany, what's happening if we don't have this resilience. So on the one hand, we have to build structures that we are resilient in Europe, and on the other hand, we have to modernize our economy, carbon neutrality, climate neutrality, the question of clean tech, innovation policy, renewable energy. So there are so much areas where we should focus on as Europe. Digitization also, it's a big topic in Europe we should focus on if we want to become strong or stay strong in the field of economics. And this is for me the second pillar if we talk about European sovereignty. And the third one is that in my eyes, Europe has to become a much more geopolitical actor. This is in the European Union with the question of Balkans joining the European Union or Ukraine joining the European Union, but it's also the question of outside the European Union. For example, we talked a lot about strategic partnerships to countries in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, and I think it's so important that the European Union is becoming a strong actor in the field of strategic partnerships. And I mean, you asked for 3 pillars, and I'm a social democrat, so I have to add a fourth one, and this is the social dimension. We also have to talk always about the social dimension here in Europe. If we don't have good wages, if we don't have good jobs, if we don't have this social cohesion, it's a problem to take all the people in our countries for the European idea. But I see that the European momentum is there, and I think it's maybe the most important topic of my political generation to articulate and to debate and to form the strong Europe. But I think these are the main 4 pillars from my perspective.
Thank you. Benjamin Haddad?
I think, first and foremost, simply put, it's about protecting the security and defending the interest of European citizens. Now, that seems like a completely obvious truism, but I think it does necessitate a change of mindset from European institutions, and especially the way we've built them. The European Union was first and foremost a peace project, an extraordinarily successful peace project on the European continent that managed to replace relations of conflict between states by relations built on law and economics and norms, but it didn't really prepare us to confront the rest of the world outside that still functions in zero-sum game, in conflictual relations, in great power competition. So it's giving European sovereignty, it's giving ourselves the tools to be able to defend our security by investing in cooperation on defense, building a defense industrial base. It's protecting our borders and having a common immigration policy, especially when we've been able to erase internal borders. That does mean that we need to be able to defend our borders. It needs understanding that trade, energy relationships have been weaponized by countries like China, like Russia, that use dependencies and interdependence that we have, and thus, investing in investment screening, in anti-coercion measures to protect each member and each individual of the European Union. It's a change of mindset that we're not just a vast NGO, but we're a political body with specific political interests, not global values to defend, specific European political interests, and we should invest in preserving them. And I'd say another word about this, preserving them alongside our allies, of course, our democratic allies, but also alone if necessary. And of course, the question of the transatlantic relationship is core on this issue. I think, especially after the year we've been through and Russian aggression on Ukraine, there's no question that NATO is the backbone of collective defense on the European continent. But that doesn't mean that Europeans should not give themselves the instruments and the tools to defend their security alone if necessary. If, for example, we have a regional crisis, I would say below the level of what would be considered an Article 5 issue for US policymakers left and right. If tomorrow we have a new crisis in the Western Balkans, If tomorrow we have a crisis in North Africa, I don't think you'd see much appetite in the American political body today to intervene on the behalf of Europeans, and rightly so. It would concern, first and foremost, European security. So it's about giving ourselves alongside NATO the ability to defend our security, especially when we think about what might come next after 2024. That also makes us, I think, strong and good allies for our partners who are asking us to invest more in our own capabilities.
Great. Foreign Minister Tajani, you talked a lot about unity and the importance of unity. I'm going to open this question to everyone, and I'd like the Prime Minister to start. How do you achieve this European strategic sovereignty when, we heard it from the floor in the previous panel, there clearly is a lack of strategic trust or strategic empathy among member states of the EU?
Well, I think that sometimes maybe we more are hooked on this narrative that, you know, if not today, then tomorrow the unity will collapse. And I know the guy who is just waiting for this, you know, and maybe encouraging this discussion further and further every day. But from a practical point of view, when you look at the decision making, yeah, of course, it takes time. It's not perfect. Sometimes it's, you know, maybe looks even annoying to part of the countries that want to move fast. But at the end of the day, you know that we cannot allow ourselves to sort of sit and squabble if we are to remain as a union and as an idea. And we know that we should remain as a union and as an idea, and we are model for other people to sort of want to be part of. So we shouldn't sort of compromise the idea ourselves. I think sometimes this debate comes, or this lag comes because of different perspectives. Let's take the very long debate about what is Russia and what can Russia do. And for so many years we had this debate. We've been called sometimes names that were not very pleasant.
Warmongers?
No. This is one of the words, but maybe sometimes we were persuaded that it's our historical trauma speaking, and that this cannot be real, you know. So this is different than the stance of a warmonger, whatever that means. But when you just write it down to some emotional content, then of course it's a little bit hurting. Now, if anybody asks me, am I happy about us being right all along the way? Of course we are the most unhappy, because if there is anything where we would have wished to be wrong, well, this is the idea. But this comes when people ask me why other countries have a different view. Because they have a different perspective, because they were constructing the welfare and the European idea since the end of Second World War, while we were just freshly independent again in 1990, and of course hungry and willing to be part of this European idea. So I think each and every time when we sit and sort of seem to be in a dead end, we must come back to what is the European idea and what is European Union. And it was mentioned, it is the biggest project of peace, first and foremost. And then it's based on values. It's not just based on, you know, on tiny business interests. I will sell you this, you will sell me that, and we will keep blind on you doing something on the side. It's based on the values. And every time we come back to values, the debate seems to calibrate, because the values, because we know something countries like China, Russia, and others were trying to portray that this is not so. That first you can build economy, and then you can build human rights, private property, independent courts, free elections, and everything. We know that this is vice versa. That first you need to have those values, the human dignity in the core, and meaning the free court system, independent court system, free elections, free press, private property, and And this is the core. This lets you create welfare and economic welfare for your people. So every time we come back to this, it seems like the debate gets back to normal.
But if I maybe may reformulate, how can you have a strategic sovereignty if you don't have the same strategic culture, if you don't have the same threat assessment in the middle of a war? How do you do that?
But we have, I think we have. Maybe there are some politicians or some debates in public that would sometimes be sort of portrayed as, oh, here it comes, here's the crack of Europe, here is no unity anymore. I do not really feel this. I think we are, maybe some of us were a little bit too optimistic of how soon this part of history will end. And we were trying to dissuade from being overly optimistic or overly sort of impatient. And what we are saying and what I am saying, we need to be patient. And patience is our strength. And trust is our strength. And if you cannot trust your friends, then whom can you trust? So you have no other option but to trust your friends.
Foreign Minister?
If we want to compete at global level today and tomorrow, we need Europe, we need to be united. As Italy, it's impossible to compete with China, with India, with Russia in the future. But also to be strong partner of the United States. It's possible to do it only if we are united. Europe is a project of peace, of course, but it is also a project, a good project for everybody. If you want to protect our citizens, if we want to help our citizens, we need to have an important umbrella. Europe is an important umbrella. There is a common identity. There are, of course, different identity. We are 27. We are different, but at the same time, we are very similar. A question. Beethoven is only a German mother tongue or is European? Dante Alighieri, the first pro-European in our history, is Italian or is European? The churches in Munich are German churches, Bavarian churches, or are European churches? The Roman Empire is only Italian or is an European heritage? España, la historia de España is in history, Spanish history is our history. This is important to understand. Every key point in every member state is also an important point for everybody in Europe.
But there's one you didn't mention, which is the history and the experience of the Eastern European countries and Baltics under the Soviet Union.
Exactly, but not easy to pave the way for a stronger unity. But we need to do it, working first of all on the most important point, security, as I said. We need an European defense if we want to be stronger among NATO. If we want to be a strong interlocutor of the United States, if we want to protect us, we need to spend more in defense in Europe, and to have an European defense. But we need also an European industrial policy. I worked hard on this for achieving this goal when I was commissioner. This is crucial. But we need also new rules, competition. There are old rules. We need new rules for our competition at global level. We need European champions if we want to compete with China, with India in the future. But we need to work more. But as I said, it's important to start with the most important point. To work on the not important point. We need more Europe on immigration, on defense, on foreign policy. Mrs. Rana worked very well in the beginning. Now we need to implement his work. We need to strengthen his work. We need a real European foreign policy. For this, I think it's possible to do it, but we need to believe in Europe. I believe in Europe.
Thank you. Lars Klingbeil?
Yeah, I mean, I also believe in Europe, but from my perspective, now is the time to do more. And this European momentum, as I said before, is there, and we have to ask ourselves, what should we do now concrete? And I can repeat what I said in my first statement. I think now is the time to talk about European defense industry and European defense structures. And we have 27 national defense strategies on the national level, but we have to put it on the European level. So we have to see that we have the same standards. We have to look for work together in the armies. We have to formulate a common strategy. I mean, to be honest, the problem is that sometimes we don't have a common strategy in some states. In Germany, we're just working on the national security strategy. I do not know if we have a common strategy towards China in Europe. I'm very clear that decoupling is not the way, so we need to talk about diversification, de-risking. We need to define in Europe in which security areas we should let the Chinese out. I think it's not good if they are in our digital infrastructure, if they are in artificial intelligence, but I do not know if we have a common ground for that in Europe. I do not know if we have a common ground or perspective in Europe how to deal with our friends from the United States. So I think we have seen how important NATO is. And I thank God every day that Joe Biden is in the White House, especially in this historical moment we have with the war in Ukraine. But we do not know what will happen after the next election in the United States. And we do not know if there is such a good transatlantic friend in the White House. So that means we now have 2 years to start this European debate. And yeah, I think this is where we should focus on. And as I mentioned before, defense is one of the most important topics, and the time is starting now to do more. And very good that Emmanuel Macron put some proposals here on the table on this conference. Olaf Scholz put some proposals on the table, and so now we have to find a common strategy and a common way, but the time is ticking, and we don't have 2 years for this process. We maybe have half a year for this process. And then we talk about the question of industrial power and economic questions, and we don't have 3 years for that. We have maybe 1 year to have an answer to the Inflation Reduction Act, a self-confident answer to the Inflation Reduction Act. But also here, time is ticking.
Benjamin?
First, I want to say I share the optimistic tone of the Prime Minister. Look, we're a year into Russia's aggression on Ukraine, and we're united. And we managed to build a united European transatlantic response. The sanctions packages are holding, and no country is talking about withdrawing from them. We're still supporting Ukraine, still looking for ways to increase weapons deliveries, military support, and we're still focused. If you had asked anyone in this room on February 24th last year, exactly a year later, would we still be in that position? Would we still have the focus, the energy, the unity at the European and the transatlantic level to say we support Ukraine until victory? I'm not sure if we had polled, I'm not sure a majority of people would have said yes. I'm pretty sure, because I was very worried about this, I would have said no, building on previous experience. We've managed to diversify and shift from dependence on Russian oil and gas, which many experts said was completely impossible. We've diversified suppliers. Our populations also have suffered and gone through many efforts to be able to limit their spending on energy. So, you know, I think first we can be proud of what's been achieved, not complacent, and, you know, still need to hold in the long term. But I think we've proven we were united. Now, however, of course, I agree with the underlying assessment of your question. There has been a problem of trust, empathy, and convergence of strategic cultures. I would say two things. I think, first, let's not underestimate that it's also a strength of the European Union. We're 27 countries with 27 histories, geographies, cultures, institutions, and I do think that's a strength, but it does necessitate empathy, listening, understanding where other countries come from, their geographies and history. And I speak from a country, France, that hasn't always been very good at this. For example, when it comes to Central Europe since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I think there's been a sort of a missed rendezvous, I would say, between us and Central Europe. That's changed in the last years, but I think it does, it is important to understand where we come from, and especially, same thing when you look at the Franco-German relationship, how important it is for us to maintain that tie because of our history. So we have different histories, and I think one of the reasons for Brexit was probably because the United Kingdom did not have the same relationship to its history, to the Second World War, and thus to the European project. So the reading, listening, talking, I think in this respect is quite interesting, it's quite important. And another aspect I would say is always keeping in mind that any organization, any collective organization is as strong as its weakest link. And so when China decides to isolate Lithuania and put economic pressure on Lithuania, it's a threat to the entire European community and European project. And this is why we have to be extraordinarily firm in protecting Lithuania and building anti-coercion mechanisms, precisely because when you probe, when an aggressive power probes, it always probes at where it sees it to be the weakest potential link. And so the entire edifice then becomes threatened. Same thing on migration. On migration, it's obvious that, once again, when you decide to have free circulation of people within the European Union, which is, I think, a tremendous success of the EU, then you understand that countries that are more exposed, like Italy, like Greece and others, to migration, need to be supported, protected by others, and you need to have internal solidarity among members to be able to support the whole edifice.
You just got a thumbs up from the Prime Minister. I don't know if you saw. Lars Klingbeil, you spoke about how we're so lucky that President Joe Biden is the president in the US, and who knows what's going to happen in the US in 2 years. So I'd like to go back to something that happened between Germany and the US in recent months, when Germany would not move on tank deliveries to Ukraine without basically strong arming the US into going ahead with it. Did that weaken the credibility of the Zeitenwende? I think back to former Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski, who has said before, we in Poland used to fear a Germany that was too strong militarily. Now we fear one that is too weak. How do you respond after that? Let's say, I don't want to call it a turning point, but it was a marking moment when Germany would not move without the US.
Sorry, the acoustic is not, the last sentence was?
Well, he said, we used to fear that Germany was too strong militarily, now we fear that it's too weak.
Yeah, I mean, I know this quote, and you have to see what happened in Germany after the war started. I mean, it's the coalition with Olaf Scholz who put 100 billion to the army, and now we have a debate about spending more money to the army. We have a process where we sit together with the defense industry and try to have a common strategy for more capabilities and more producing. And I think Germany takes a leading role in the question of how to answer to this war. And this is on the field of military delivery, it's also on the field on sanctions, it's on the field of political pressure we put to Putin. And I think Olaf Scholz, when he was speaking here on Friday on this stage, he was totally clear about the German position. But in this special situation, when we had the decision if we would deliver tanks, it's absolutely important that Putin knows that the West is standing together and that everyone in the West is doing something, not just one country. And this was an important signal also for the people in Germany that if we go this way and You have to know not everyone is convinced in Germany and the public that this is the right step to deliver tanks. There are so many people that have fear of a third world war, that have fear about Europe is going to be attacked by Russians and all of this. And so we have to take the people with us. So Olaf Scholz is very clear. The government is very clear. The coalition is very clear on this question. We want to support Ukraine. But for Germany, and especially for the people in Germany, it's important that we took this step together with the United States and with other countries. And it was always very clear that there's no national way in this question. We need a way together with our partners. And so this was important. And that's the reason why there were the talks with the United States.
Benjamin Haddad, you said something about a missed rendezvous at some point with Central Europe. There seems to have also been a missed rendezvous at the beginning of this war by perhaps France and Germany when it came to putting in place very quickly strategic sovereignty in a situation, as you had said in your first remarks, where NATO wasn't the right response and Article 5 wasn't the response. Why did that happen?
What do you mean exactly about the missed rendezvous?
So, France and Germany ceded the leadership in terms of the military response to this war in Europe to the US when this war could have been the time to show that they could lead on that level.
Yeah, look, first, once again, I think the biggest lesson is that the West has been united in supporting Ukraine, United States, Europeans, and I don't think, we should cherry pick or have a competition about, who was first or who supported more. I think President Macron, from the start, has been very clear about the fact that we support Ukraine, that we give weapons. We had maybe a different way of communicating about weapons deliveries than other countries that were more explicit and open about it, but I think that has changed since then. And there was also, I'll talk about it very openly, I think a sense that you needed to keep a form of diplomatic connection with the Russian president. Of course, first before the war, where the president and Chancellor Scholz went to Moscow and Kiev to try to find a diplomatic exit, and I think that was a brave thing to do. Unfortunately, we have a Russian president that chose war and aggression, and that closed the door to diplomacy. And afterwards, to try to show the Russian president the folly of his endeavor and the fact that very early on, it certainly wasn't working as Vladimir Putin hoped and expected. But once again, I mean, it takes two to tango, and when you have a leader in Moscow that has clearly closed the door to any form of diplomacy and dialogue, there's absolutely no alternative to supporting Ukraine. Now, where I agree with you, I do think it is a test for European sovereignty and European defense and security. It is about showing to our partners, it's about first and foremost giving Ukrainians the means to defend themselves and free their country. But it is also for France and Germany about showing our partners in Central Europe that we stand by them. And so this is why you've seen also France invest more in forward presence of NATO. You've seen the French-led mission in Romania, increased presence in countries like Estonia, Lithuania, or Poland. I think all of this is really necessary and for us, important to keep in the long haul.
I turn now to I would like a quick, short response to the three proposals that President Macron put on the table on Friday when it comes to sort of defense and security. He talked about, the first thing was, massive rearmament of Europe. The second was holding a conference on European air defense. And the third was reiterating the European dimension of France's nuclear deterrence and re-inviting European partners, as he had done in 2020, to engage in a conversation about nuclear deterrence in Europe. And I'm curious to hear if obviously this was put on the table on Friday, but what is your quick response to that? I'll start with the Prime Minister, perhaps.
Well, thanks. I don't think we had a good chance to discuss that in detail, but I think it's always must be seen in a broader context. because I cannot imagine the situation where Europe can completely rely on itself and forget about the other partners who are so crucial in our security situation and defense, and namely US and NATO as a bloc. So I think that from any person from my part of the world, you would most probably hear the positive attitude, although with a grain of salt, where we look what that means in a particular details. Because yes, air defense. I mean, we see the war in Ukraine, and of course we pay lots of attention to this episode from the 24th of February. But we must not forget that the war is going on for much longer than this year of this invasion that started last year. So we must see. And we see the weak points that we need to take into account. And of course, air defense is something that is also mentioned in NATO Madrid summit conclusions. So, yep, it is important because when we speak about the weapons that delivered to Ukraine and the fact that the US is first in the ranks, there is no big surprise in this because, well, although each and every time we go through our stocks, we still find something we can deliver, and it would be better that we moved faster, but we all know that we need to replenish. We need not only to replenish, but we also need to expand, and for this we also need industry capacities. And the industry is a little bit waiting on what the governments will do, because for industry to expand, they need to know that the announcement of billions and billions will transform to billions in the budgets, because then you can move, you can expand, and you can provide the European countries with more or less weapons of the same standard that Lars was talking about, which I think is very important in case of, I mean, for the interoperability of our military. So. Interesting to hear. We'll participate in debate and see where that brings us.
Thank you. Foreign Minister.
But as I said, we need to spend more for the European defense. To spend more for the defense is possible also, is more or less to spend less at the national level, because we will coordinate the money, we will coordinate the budget on defense for a stronger European defense. It's possible to work all together for the same tanks, for the same plane. We need to work also at industrial level much better. This is a stronger European defense, and without a stronger European defense, it's impossible to have a stronger European foreign policy. We need to work hard in this direction. We need at industrial level, first of all, because this is crucial to work with the defense industry. But to have a strong defense policy is not to be in favor everywhere. It's to be in favor of peace, because if we protect well our borders, is to be in favor of peace. It's more or less the same situation in Ukraine. Why? We defend and we protect Ukraine because we want peace. Why? A defeat of Ukraine is not a solution for peace. If we want the peace, we need two interlocutors at the same round table, but Ukraine free. Because for this we send military heads. Italy approved 6 packages in this sector, but also in other different sectors, not only military sectors. To help in this moment Ukraine is to work for peace, because our goal is to achieve peace. We are not against peace. Italy is not in war against Russia. Italy is engaged in defense of the independence of Ukraine. For this, we need to spend in the future, to spend it better. More is also better at national level. Because today, the European defense system is only the beginning. We are working at the industrial level with a small group of soldiers, but we need to do more in the future. If we want, the defense is part of the foreign policy, and we need to do more on this. A proposal, you have spoken on the nuclear.
Yep.
Nuclear is a danger. Look at Iran. We need to pay attention. I have spoken with the General Director of the United Nations Agency on Iran, the situation. They are working hard in this sector, but if you want peace, we need to stop this. There is a danger in Ukraine now. My idea, our idea, is to have a free zone around Zaporizhzhia. Should be a first point for peace, to stop the battle around Zaporizhzhia, because Zaporizhzhia is very dangerous for everybody. The nuclear is, I am in favor of nuclear energy.
But on nuclear deterrence, and the French nuclear deterrent in Europe, and the role it could have, maybe.
We need a lot of time for this. France is a nuclear, for France nuclear is normal, but on nuclear I want to start on energy before, then to weapons. Nuclear is, we need a lot of time for doing nuclear weapons. I think now is important to, first of all, to protect Ukraine for achieving peace. I think I want to underline this point. We are in favor of Ukraine because we want peace.
Yeah.
This is a clear point. We need to explain to the European public opinions. We want peace, and for this we are working in defense of the independence of Ukraine.
Thank you. Lars Klingbeil.
To the 3 points from the speech of Emmanuel Macron, I agree with the first point on more spending in military, but I have to say that we also need more spending in development aid. We have to have more spending in social policy in Europe. We have to spend more on industrial policy. We have to, so we need a strong Europe also in other areas. This is important for me to say. The second point I want to mention to this question is that it's not, I mean, we spend much more money on the national level, and I think on the European level it's not just spending more money, it's also about interoperability, it's about standards, it's about coordination, it's about the same strategy, and it's not just more money. So, I mean, we need more money, but we also need the other things like strategy and all of this. Second point, air shield. And I mentioned before that I'm very thankful that Macron put his 6th point on the table here and these proposals, and this is very good for the strategic debate, and we need this debate in Europe now. And I mean, we know all about the debates between Germany and France, and I'm so happy that I think there's now this common will to go forward together. And Olaf Scholz also, when he gave his speech in Prague, presented some ideas about the question of air defense and the shield, and so I think now we have to look how we bring the concepts together and start the debate. But I cannot say I'm against Macron, I'm in favor of his ideas. I think we now have to start the talks and see how we bring this together. But the point for me is we have the security gap on air defense. We have it right now. We know what would happen if the Russians start missile attacks, for example, towards Germany. And so this is the reason why we have to start now. And if I understood right, if we take the Americans or the Israelis' ideas and materials, then we could go very fast. If we start now the European initiatives, it would take much more longer time. And so this is the question for me, could we bring the ideas for the short term to fill the gap we have now in security, and on the long term to build this European initiatives. Could we bring these ideas together? And this is the debate for the next weeks. And on the question of nuclear deterrence, I don't fully agree, and I want to say that very openly. So I'm very happy that we have this transatlantic answer from this answer here in Germany, together with our friends from the United States, on the question of nuclear questions and nuclear deterrence. And I have some questions to the French side. I mean, if I see how strong the position of the president in France is for a nuclear answer, for example, I didn't understand if Macron wants to share this power with the European partners or what his ideas are. And I think we also have to talk about these questions in the next months in the European strategic debates. But I think in Germany we are very happy to have the transatlantic link in nuclear questions.
Benjamin Haddad, do you want to maybe clarify? Or?
Sure. Well, first maybe on the general gist of the speech calling for a rearmament that's both a material and also an intellectual rearmament of Europe. I think that's really key, and that should be a generational priority for all of us. I mean, it's a very well-known fact that if you accumulate every national European defense budget, you end up with the second after the US military budget in the world. Does that translate in actual operational capabilities and actual expeditionary capabilities? Of course not. So I think there is a need to better coordinate, to have more interoperability, to build common capabilities, and we've had progress recently on the Franco-German fighter, for example. So I think this is probably, I'm not a federalist. I think that, of course, defense will still be first and foremost a national sovereign competence, and I think that's actually a positive thing. But having more shared capabilities and the political will to use them, because sometimes we do have them, but we still hesitate over using them, I think is really key. On the question of the nuclear deterrent, I think it's clear that the French nuclear deterrent will stay a sovereign, independent deterrent. But if you look at the doctrine, the nuclear deterrent is there to protect French vital interest, and vital interest include also the security of allies and European partners. And we're such a far cry from the debates during the 60s with the United States. I think now over autonomous nuclear deterrence of European allies, especially France, which were one of the factors that led General de Gaulle in '66 to leave the NATO integrated military command that Nicolas Sarkozy joined back 15 years ago. The truth is now I think there's no doubt that having autonomous nuclear deterrence like the one of France contribute to the general security of the transatlantic alliance, alongside, of course, the US nuclear deterrent. And one word maybe on the question of the defense industrial base. Of course, the devil is in the detail, and that's something that we've been negotiating at the European level for years. I think it's really key, if we want to have the capabilities to defend ourselves as Europeans, to have a solid, autonomous industrial base, interoperable with the ones of our allies like the United States, of course. But I'm a retired think tanker that went to politics. And you also need, if you increase defense spending, as we've been doing in France, over 10 years, 12 years, the defense budget of France will have doubled. 25% in the last 5 years, and then in the next budget is bringing us basically to double. And of course, that's even less than some of our key partners in Central Europe and elsewhere. If you want to be able to justify that, sell that to your public opinions, to your voters, you also need, I think, to show that it trickles down in terms of industry, in terms of jobs, in terms of growth for the population. I think it's very important. Defense spending, we all know, I think, here and in this room, how crucial it is to our security and our capabilities. But it's not the same kind of public expenditure as justice, health, or education that you use every day. You don't, if everything goes right, you don't need to use your military capabilities every day. But it's the life insurance of your nation. And so you better have it the day an unexpected crisis shows up.
I'd like to now move on a bit, maybe perhaps to the industrial side, and Europe's response to, let's start with the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. I'd love to hear, and perhaps Foreign Minister Tajani, you can start with that, given your previous experience as Commissioner for Industry. How does Europe respond properly to the IRA from the US without further distorting the free trade in the world, but also without siphoning off more investment that could help the green transitions of whether it's Africa, whether it's Asia. We've heard a lot about how important it is for Europe to also have empathy toward the global South, take into account their needs. How do you do that? And to quote Chancellor Scholz and President Macron, how do you de-risk without decoupling from the rest of the world and then allowing China to move into these spaces?
We need a conference for the answer. But I think the industrial policy is crucial for Europe. We want to compete on the quality at global level. The inflation is a problem for the Americans, is a problem for us. But the difference is very clear. The inflation in America is an internal inflation. In Europe, the inflation is coming from abroad. The problem for us is the situation in Ukraine. I think for the American companies, it's a good choice to back the industrial competition. In Europe, what is possible to do if you want to compete at global level, not only with the Americans? I think to have free state aid is not a good choice, because the freedom of state aids without limits is against the competition among the European Union. It's only to help one or two countries against the other countries. Probably we need to choose other solutions. To have only one in European industrial policy. My idea is to have another recovery plan for putting more European money among the European Union. If we want to compete at global level as Europe, we need to have different choices, not only the total freedom of the state aids, because the richest countries will be more money for the competition, and the other countries less money for the competition. This is not a good choice for the competition, because competition is one of the most important key points among the European Union. I want to compete at global level, of course, but I want to compete as Italian industry at internal level, at European level. For this, I think it's better to have an European fund for helping and for supporting at global level the European industries.
Lars Klingbeil, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think we are together in the analysis that the Inflation Reduction Act is a big challenge for Europe, and but I have to underline that I'm very happy that the Americans do this climate policy. I think it's important for the world that they start now with an active climate policy and try to get the carbon neutrality and all of this. And So now we have to formulate our answer, and as I said before, it must be a self-confident answer. We have strategic decisions focusing on industry policy. We have to reform the state aid. Yes, we have to find some money also for invest. We have to see if Next Gen EU, I think there are some money left we can maybe take for this. We can also have an open debate, and I say this, I underline, as a party leader, not as member of the government. As Social Democrats in Germany, we are open for a debate about finance resources and find them for the European investments. But we have to take the decisions now, and then we have to sit together with the Americans and talk, because I think at the end it must be a transatlantic agenda on industry policy. And this is what we have to make crystal clear to our American friends. It's not okay if we take more responsibility on security, and we will do that. We talked about this in the last hour. It's not okay if we as Europeans take another politic towards China, and this is also an economic risk for Europe. But then the Americans' friends coming and make an industry policy that's not meant against us, but that's in some ways against us. And it's a big challenge for Europe. So we have to talk about common trade agreements, about the instruments in the Inflation Reduction Act and on the European side. So for me, it's important that there's no battle between the United States and Europe, but for that we have to go a common way. And the first thing is that we have to find a European answer. But to me, it seems after the last European Council that we're on a good way. There are proposals on the table from Ursula von der Leyen and from others. And yes, it's about state aid, it's about strategic dimension, it's about investments, it's about European money, and I think this must be the solution in the next months.
Benjamin Haddad, do you want to add something quickly?
Three quick points, because I strongly agree with what you just said. First, I do think the proposals that were put on the table recently by President von der Leyen go in the right direction. We need massive investment for the green transition. And if it comes with some state aid, if it comes with rethinking some of the competition policy that sometimes has gone against our own industrial and economic interest, then let's have no taboo, and let's not be naive also about what some of our partners are doing in terms of protectionism. Second point, it is still important, while protecting our own economic interests, to have this robust transatlantic dialogue. And while I really applaud the amazing job the Biden administration has done in coordinating a transatlantic response to Russian aggression on Ukraine, I think it's been less impressive when it comes to having this economic dialogue, especially when it comes to the Chinese challenge, which is ironic because it was the priority when the Biden administration came into power. President Biden's first trip was to Brussels. We set up the TTC, the Transatlantic Tech and Trade Dialogue, and at the time the understanding was if you want to build a common response to China, it's not going to be primarily a military one. It's the question that's being asked is what kind of globalization, what kind of rules and norms do we want on supply chains, on investment, on digital norms. And in this, need to engage in the dialogue with the EU, with Brussels, with the Commission and its normative instruments. And I think maybe because it's been hijacked by the war in Ukraine, we haven't been able, I think, to have this robust conversation. And the third point is at the European level, I think we need to have a frank conversation about energy policy and energy prices. The way the energy market currently is set up tends to inflate prices artificially, which also goes against our own economic and industrial interests. It's a complex debate, but the way prices are set up is determined by the latest producing unit, which tends to be a gas plant. And when you have a higher mix of renewables or nuclear in your energy mix, you still have a higher share, you still have very high prices. And so I think having it's a complicated and also debate where you have lots of different national interests, but we need to have a serious conversation about the way this is fixated.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up now to the public, and the first question will go to our Munich young leader, Nereo Peñalver.
Thank you very much. Today we're suffering the consequences of a policy over decades in which we decoupled our sources of prosperity from our sources of security. This created some dependencies. These dependencies are being weaponized today. You discussed that part of the solution is diversification of our energy sources, of our supply chains. Should we discuss also the role that new technologies can have in our manufacturing processes? For instance, how can 3D printing technologies help us shorten our supply chains? Thank you.
Prime Minister, you want to take that?
Yeah, I might start. Definitely yes, because the question is, there was a mentioning of the high inflation that is imported in the case of European Union. Yes, we know it is imported, but then the question is what we do about it. Shall we sit and wait until the situation sorts out somehow and then again come to Moscow and ask, can you offer us some cheap gas now on some other conditions? So of course this is not the way we should proceed. I mean, this transition that we have to go through here is meant to happen from the sort of starting point that there is no point of return here. So we need to completely reshuffle and rearrange our energy system, where this can play a very significant role, and we should think about new generation energy systems, about new technologies, green technologies, hydrogen, whatever, that is part of the grid. And here is this European sovereignty very high on the agenda, because when we speak about IRA, it sometimes looks like, we want to have two for two. Yeah. If there is IRA, let's make our own IRA. But this is a sort of a wrong assumption. Let's do our homework. We know our problems. Many of them should be sorted out at European level. We will need European funds for that, and very, very strong cooperation also at industrial level, at the level of investments, into-country investment grids and everything whatnot. So this is where the place for these technologies is very, very visible, and I think this is how we should see it for the future.
Lars Klingbeil?
I totally agree that we should focus on new technologies and digitization and all these questions. I mean, especially in Germany, we paid a high price for the dependencies we had towards Russia and the Russian gas, and we did mistakes, yes, you're right. And so that means now we must learn for the future. And as I mentioned before, I think there are some areas where we should let the Chinese out, artificial intelligence, all of this. And I mean, I do not know who's doing something on the question of industrial metaverse, for example. So this is so important for European industries, that we are good on the question of industrial metaverse, that we are good on the question on AI, that we are good on all these developments that are there, and also good on the question of new energy developments. And if we see the funds we had with Next Gen EU, so I mean they were focusing on all this question of modernization. So it's in economy, it's a question of resilience, but it's also the question of modernization, to have a strong Europe and to create the future jobs here on this continent. And so I totally agree that we should focus on, but I think it's on the economic agenda of the European Union and all of the debates that are on the European level.
Thank you. We have a question here from the MP from Ukraine, please.
Lisa Yasko, member of Ukraine Parliament. Dear colleagues, friends, when we talk about the future of Europe as sovereignty, we should ask ourselves what were the reasons why we got to the situation as a year ago. And one of the reasons is actually the influence of Russian propaganda and disinformation. And we didn't talk about this here. But, I'm also a reporter on the situation in France, on the human rights situation, on behalf of the Council of Europe. And I know how disinformation and influence on the media and in politics is a big problem in France and in other countries that you represent. But now specifically, I want to ask our Italian friend, on behalf of thousands of Ukrainians who are very much concerned that while all the member states banned Russian media, in Italy, somehow, Russian media is still working. This is different requests that I get from Ukrainians, but also personally, I was recently in Italy, and in the hotels where I was staying, I saw Russian media everywhere. Why is it so? Can we change that, please?
Foreign Minister.
But for the Italians to understand Russian is not easy. Also to understand English for this, for the large part of Italians that speaks Italian for this. But I think Russian propaganda is working through the social network more than the newspaper. Today, the information is through the social network. For this, we are implementing the decision of the European Union on the copyright, because through the copyright it's possible to check, and because to check the situation, to have a defense of the right information. This is crucial. The intellectual, but a large, I think, there is not a Russian, frankly speaking, not a Russian propaganda. Of course, there are the journalists working in Russia, but I think that the large part, the 99% of the Italians are in favor of Ukraine. It's not, I think, for me, Russian propaganda doesn't exist in my country. It's not a problem. There are a lot of Italians here.
I guess the question is, why allow Russian televisions to continue to be available in Italy, to be watched in Italy? Given that, you know, whether it's RT or Sputnik, etc.
There's not a problem for nobody watching the Russian television. I think in Italy, look, Italy is completely different. We are not close to Russia. Nobody is watching Russian television, Russian newspaper. This is not a problem for us. No. But your opinion, of course, I respect your opinion, but please respect my opinion, because it doesn't exist, this problem in Italy. The Russian propaganda is out, is completely out, doesn't exist. Nobody knows the Russian newspaper. I think nobody in Italy watches the Russian television. It's missing. There is the country with the stronger action against oligarchs, the stronger action by Guardia di Finanza. I want to be very clear on this. Nobody in Europe is doing what Guardia di Finanza is doing against these Russians. Our action is very, very, very strong. This is not Russian propaganda.
Thank you. I have two requests from the panel to also respond to that question. Prime Minister.
If I may, I think one important thing to mention here is that for so many years, so many people in Europe, politicians, also other observers, were blind to see that what actually happens is that Russia takes all the values that we cherish so much, like independent courts, like welfare state, like freedom of speech, like free elections, and participate in all of this for the abuse of, for their own benefit. So they are now using our court system to challenge the sanctions, because we have independent courts and they might use their chances. They were using our education, healthcare, all the systems for their wives, kids, mistresses, and mothers-in-laws. And then they were registering property in Europe because they knew it is safe, and they were also betting and speculating on this freedom of speech, saying that, look, if you tolerate all the opinions, then you need to tolerate also this opinion. But I mean, it's a right time to say that there is no media. Even you in your question said media. It's not media. It's just propaganda. And as soon as we understand that there is no media, and just propaganda. So we will feel much braver to put ban on all the channels that we can control. Thanks.
Benjamin Haddad.
I was going to say the same thing. Information space is comparable to the conversation we've just had about trade, about energy relationships. It's authoritarian regimes using our openness, free markets, our democratic values as a weapon. They're weaponizing it as tools of leverage and influence. When we close Russia Today and Sputnik in Europe, we don't restrict freedom of speech. We actually push back against state weapons that are used by an authoritarian state to restrict our own independence and sovereignty. And that's, I think, a nuance that's very important. I agree with Foreign Minister Tajani that one of the biggest battle spaces is going to be social media. And everything that we're doing at the European level, Digital Service Act, etc., is precisely to be able to at least have a sense of fighting against hate speech, fighting against disinformation on social media. And it's very important here to try to have a conversation with our American friends about the different kind of norms and regulation you can see. And just one last point on this. We're talking about the internal challenges of our own democracies, but Europe, and I think that's one of the things that we've awakened to in last year, has also failed to compete in terms of influence with Russia and even China in our own neighborhood. When you look at the Western Balkans, I'll take just one example, vaccine policy, vaccine distribution. I think it's been a great success of the European Union at the level of the 27. But when you go to Serbia or Bosnia in 2021, it's Chinese vaccines that have been distributed. They're on our continent. And same thing when you go to Moldova, Georgia. So it's not only about disinformation and propaganda, it's also that on actual policies, even in our own neighborhood, we failed to compete against authoritarian regime in the last decades.
Thank you. We have a question here from the gentleman in the glasses, fourth row. If someone can get him a mic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very much for enlargement, not to be misunderstood. The Western Balkan countries, Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova. A lot of reasons I have not to argue. It was said enough about that in the course of the last 3 days. But we will be then 36 member states. Are we prepared for that with our decision-making procedures? The efficiency of our decision-making? I believe not, as we see every day. The history of the European Union, we had in the 80s Eurosclerosis, nothing went. Then it became, in the 80s, the single market, in creating the single market by inventing majority voting. There would be no single market without majority voting. And the same was the procedures then in the 90s. Monetary Union, Amsterdam, Nice, Lisbon. It was all the way to prepare for the enlargements around 2004, to make the European Union able in competences, but especially in decision-making. Now we talk about 36 member countries, but not about the reform of the European Union. We ask all the candidate countries to reform, but nobody asks, we do not ask ourselves to reform ourselves to be able for enlargement.
Thank you. I'm going to pool some questions. There's a gentleman right there, and then the lady in the second row, just so that we can end on time and I can, Ambassador Heusgen can give the closing remarks. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. It's Ulrich Lechte, spokesperson of the Liberal Party in the German Bundestag. I just want to raise the question, and being the Advocatus Diaboli, what happens if the US have to focus on the Pacific conflict? What happens when all the production we are just seeking to get from the US is not coming to Europe? What's about our defense industry? Are we able to raise the production lines there? Are we able to come by with projects like FCAS, don't thinking about where to produce it, then how to produce it, and come by to raise our own defense industry? That would be quite a question I would like to hear answered by all of the panelists, please.
Thank you. And the lady in the second row, please.
Thank you. Zanda Kalman Jelkoševica, Deputy Speaker of the Latvian Parliament. And first of all, thank you for the great discussion. And as we are discussing security of Europe and strategic autonomy of Europe, I would like to ask the distinguished panel, would you agree to the statement that we cannot imagine anymore the European Union whole, free and in peace without Ukraine as its member, and that we should speed up accession of Ukraine to the European Union, not only because of the will of the Ukraine and our moral duty towards Ukrainian people, but because it's in the interest of Europe itself. And we cannot indeed be whole, free and peace anymore without Ukraine as part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask our panelists to please respond briefly. So 3 questions, you answer whichever one you prefer. Enlargement, reform of EU, US focus on the Pacific and so no longer able to pull the weight it has so far, and then speeding up Ukraine's accession. Perhaps, Prime Minister, you want to start?
Well, I will speak most probably about the last question, no surprise, but then I will try to mention a couple of things about the others. As you know, Lithuania was, same as Latvia, among the countries who were supportive for Ukraine accession towards in the EU before it was cool. I mean, for ages, forever. And the calculation in this, if I might use this word because it's a little bit downgrading, but the rationale behind this is that basically, with Russia as it is, and with autocrats becoming stronger and more cooperative among themselves, it is delusional to think about the areas of nobodies. Like sometimes people were saying, you know, to me in some private or even political conversations, why don't you let something be a buffer zone? And then I'm saying, you know, somebody might want me for a buffer zone, but I mean, as a nation, I want to be able to make choices. And we have our choice, and our choice is pro-European. And I think same holds true for Ukraine as well. Because for Europe, it is a geopolitical issue to have the region of Ukraine, Moldova, also countries like Georgia and Balkans definitely, in line with the values that we share. Because this is not about, you know, exerting some colonialistic idea like Russia does. It's on the contrary. It's based on the same understanding of peace and prosperity. So I think absolutely yes. And it is not because now Ukraine is fighting and paying human life toll every day for the European idea, basically. But this is because even from years behind, it had significant rationale for European Union to embrace Ukraine, Balkans, and other countries that otherwise might dip into something which is not in our interest. Now, coming to the question about the United States and the risk that the United States will not have time for us, so to say. I think that it is extremely important what we are doing now with our position against and our stance against Russia. Because same like we learn from each other, same like we cooperate, autocrats unfortunately also learn from each other and from each other's lessons, and do things or do not do things because there are lessons to learn from. So I think we, first and foremost, we need to stick to our line as long as it is needed. And but what I think is also important, speaking about us as countries from NATO world, is that North Atlantic security is becoming more and more inseparable from Indo-Pacific. So the potential for cooperation among the democracies in this region is also very strong.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and thank you for keeping it short. Foreign Minister.
On enlargement, yes. We need to work hard for the enlargement in the Western Balkans. There are a lot of countries candidates. Italy has been in favor of the candidacy of Bosnia and Herzegovina. We need to do more. Also, we need to work for supporting, as Elmar Brok said, to support this country for reforms. We need to work hard in this direction also with Ukraine. Ukraine is a country candidate to be member of the European Union. We want to work with Ukraine also for the reconstruction of Ukraine after the end of this war. On the defense, we need to do more in Europe. We need an European defense. The European defense is to spend more for the European defense and less at the national level, because the coordination is a good solution also for everybody. We need to have also a stronger defense industry in Europe for a better coordination between the different countries in every sector. At technological level also, we need to work more in cyber security. Also, this is crucial, innovation and research, but cyber security is a key point in this moment, because we are under attack, cyber attack, everywhere, every day. This is very important. On the United States, it's impossible to be alone. We need the net umbrella for the defense of our countries, of our Europe, with a strong link between Europe and America. But we need to pay attention also in the Indo-Pacific region. We need to work also with Japan, Australia, New Zealand, under NATO umbrella. For this is crucial. The cooperation, I started with this position. For Italy, there are two key points: Europe and transatlantic relations. And also on defense policy, we need to do it.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Lars Klingbeil.
Okay, the first question of Ukraine joining European Union. Yes, we are very clear about that in German politics. I think European level is clear. Olaf Scholz is clear about that. I think I was one of the first Social Democrats asking for this in public, and but there are criteria. So, I mean, Ukraine has to fulfill the criteria, but we can make this a political process, and I think it's important also as a signal towards Ukraine. About the enlargement and the question of Elmar Brok, I think it's not the question if we want enlargement. I think if we see Europe as a geopolitical actor, we need enlargement, and we need it very fast. And we have to be absolutely clear on that. Otherwise, and my French colleague told it, all these countries will seek the connections towards China, Russia, and all of this. So if we want Europe to stay strong, we need enlargement. But that does not mean that we do not need also reforms. I mean, I'm absolutely in favor of more majority votings, and I'm absolutely in favor of reforms in the European Union to have this as a political actor, but the question of enlargement is a high political question, and we should be very clear on that. And the last question about Europe and US and our friendship, I mean, I'm also absolutely clear that the Americans will focus more in the Indo-Pacific region, and this is the reason why we should do more. And I think this is a signal here from Olaf Scholz, from Macron. On the talks I had on this Munich Security Conference, everyone was very clear that Europe has to do more military spending, more structures on defense industry on the European level, more strategy debates and strategy decisions on the European level. I don't think that the Americans will make this hard cut after the next election. So we are very happy to have them on our side, but they will make a lot more pressure that we do more. And to me, it seems on this conference that Europe is ready for that, and now we have to fulfill.
Thank you. I'm going to borrow 2 minutes from Ambassador Heusgen's time and give it to Benjamin Haddad for the final word.
Yeah, I'm feeling the heat. quickly on enlargement in Ukraine. Yes, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, the Western Balkans are destined to join the European Union, a part of the European family. But yes, Almar, this will mean, I think, strong reform, internal reform of the European Union and a more agile decision-making process. And also, let's be lucid, honest, and frank with our partners. It will take time. It's both a political and a technical process. It does mean administrative reforms, rule of law, internal fight against corruption. There's a lot. It will take years, but that doesn't mean it's an either out. And I think this is why President Macron has been pushing the European political community as a for, not as an alternative, but as a for in the meantime to engage our neighborhood on a lot of concrete projects to keep them anchored to the European Union. And on the question of the United States, yes, I think it's a clear risk. And I mean, this is one of the reasons why we've been discussing European sovereignty. There is a risk, and it's a risk that American policymakers have been warning us about, that the US shifts to Asia or even shifts to being more inward-looking. And this is why I think we have to invest in European sovereignty. But I would say just one last thing. I think it's also a way to salvage the transatlantic relationship, to shift it to something more mature, more balanced. The best way to keep the transatlantic relationship alive and the United States anchored to the European continent is not to show that we're weak or that we have no value added. On the contrary, is to show that we're a strong, able partner that can act on its own and that adds value added to the relationship.
Thank you, and thank you for those closing remarks. Please join me in thanking our panelists, and go ahead. And please remain seated because Ambassador Heusgen is going to give the closing remarks, and I invite the panelists to join the public. Thank you. We can go sit there.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you for being here. Vielen Dank, das war gestern mit Bayern so ein Scheiß. Good afternoon. I know after 3 long, exhausting, interesting days, you are looking forward to some rest, so I promise I will not speak much over an hour. No, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for all of you to joining us here at the Munich Security Conference. I think we have seen a number of very interesting speeches, debates on this podium, in our town halls, public squares, in round tables, and it was very, very rich, and I would like to thank all those who have been engaged in the different fora. I want to thank all of them for their engagement, for their participation. It was wonderful. I have only seen a part of it, but I was really impressed by what I have seen, and I hope that you have the same impression. I hope that you all have also seen that what I announced at the beginning has actually been implemented, and that we have 50% women on our panels. This is what we wanted to do, and I think we accomplished. I promise that we'll continue to do this. Also, I know I will lose a few friends among you, but we will also within the public become a bit younger and even younger, and also we will also have want to increase the number of women participants, where we have also already reached a record number. Now, to summarize, the last 3 days is very difficult, and we all take home something different from this conference. When you look at the speakers and when you now recall what was the most impressive for me, it was President Zelensky. We had him on screen. He was last year, he was here, it was his last visit before Vladimir Putin decided to invade his country. He was here on screen, and we all have the hope that next year he will be here in person, which means that this horrible war is over. What I take away from this conference is this strong transatlantic and beyond unity. Unity that we do not accept this breach of civilization, that we do not accept that in the 21st century borders in Europe are changed by force. We do not accept this horrible war that is being waged. For this to be successful, we need to continue to have this very strong transatlantic unity, to have this largest CODEL in Munich was very happy. I was very happy about this, and this sent this signal, and we saw this. This was a signal that crossed the aisles in the US that yes, we are here to stay. We have more staying power than Vladimir Putin. For this, we have to do our homework. This was very strong. European and German defense spending has to go up. We have to have the capabilities to support Ukraine, but also to build up our own defense. I don't need to go into detail there. This message came across a lot. We have seen these terrible crimes. When I think about other speakers we have had, I was very impressed by the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. It was wonderful to have her here for the second time in a row. From her speech, what I picked out was that she very clearly said, from the US perspective, what Vladimir Putin is committing is crime against humanity. And this needs conclusions. We have to have accountability. And I'm very happy that this was raised in many speeches. It cannot be that the crimes that are committed go without being accounted for. So we need strengthening of the International Criminal Court. I heard many who said we need the special court of the United Nations for the crime of aggression, and we need to be strong to actually work for it at the UN. We do this justice for the victims, for peace, and also as deterrent. Third takeaway here is we need to involve more in the Munich Security Conference in general, the so-called, I say so-called Global South. We brought him here on stage. We have the largest number of representatives from Latin America, from Africa and Asia. We heard them. We heard how they complained about the consequences of this war, the high grain price, energy price, the problems in the debt crisis. We don't have enough money to fight climate change. And many of them say, well, you have to get this war over and you have to stop supplying weapons. We need to concentrate on those issues. Yes, we need to concentrate on those, but what we have to do at the same time, we have to preserve the rules-based international order, the UN Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because these are universal values and these are not Western values. This is what the global community is built on, and we have to work for it, and we have to engage much more with the so-called Global South to get this point across, and this has to be something where we, and I speak we as Germans, Europeans, have to listen much more carefully to also what their concerns are, and that we are actually responding to this. Now, the Munich Security Conference is, of course, a podium where you have lots of speeches, but there is a second part to it. And this is what one of my predecessors, Wolfgang Ischinger is here, and but also Horst Teltschik is here or was here, and he put the motto for the Munich Security Conference on paper, which is still today, and this is peace through dialogue. And we are very happy that on the margins of the Munich Security Conference, as in the past, we had a lot of dialogue which I think would not have happened if we hadn't had the chance here to get so many of you around. And just think about the fact that it was possible to have the foreign ministers, sorry, Madame Fu, I always call him foreign minister, he is now the state councillor. We had Wang Yi here, he gave a speech where if I had more time I would discuss a bit with you on it, but what was very important that he met with Tony Blinken, and I think what the world needs is not another conflict. What we need is that we resolve the challenges that we have also involving US and China, that we get to a solution which does not lead to another conflict. We had a meeting of the G7 foreign ministers. We had a meeting, it was the first time ever that the presidents of Azerbaijan and Prime Minister of Azerbaijan, Armenia and Georgia met. First time ever that they met. They met on a podium here at the Munich Security Conference. I wouldn't say that they resolved the conflict, but at least they were not physically fighting each other, they were talking, and I think there is also a glimpse of hope that this will continue. We had a Balkans roundtable where we have a lot of challenges. We had, and there was a very tough decision to take. We didn't have an official Russian here, we didn't have an official Iranian here, but what we did have here were two very interesting town halls, and that was one with the Russian opposition of the older generation, of the young generation, discussing the future of Russia. We had also, I think for the first time, and unfortunately we had some demonstrations, but I think it was very important that we also had the Iranian opposition there. These are two regimes in Russia and in Iran, where I think the way that they are violating international law, they are violating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I think it was right not to give them the stage here for their propaganda, but give their people a chance to discuss and see how they can progress. Oh, I forgot one thing. We also had the Weimar Triangle meet, the president of France, Germany and Poland. And this was also very important for the European Union, because I believe only if we stick together as the European Union, we can make progress and actually cope with all the challenges that we are facing. Now, I promised you not to be much over 1 hour. I would like at the end to thank you all, to thank all the people on the podiums. I want to thank the MSC staff. This is incredible. I have never had such a motivated group of young women and men, also a bit older one like Benedikt Franke, but I have never had so many enthusiastic young people that work for this, be it in accreditation, be in trying to get the room for you, be in trying to see that you who should not enter in a fight with you, you hate them, but they do their job. And it was just fantastic in preparing this conference, and I saw their enthusiasm during the conference, and it's just really a pleasure for me to work with them. And finally, I have to say goodbye to Boris Ruge. Boris, please come up. I think I speak also in the name of Wolfgang Ischinger. Boris Ruge served as our deputy for how many years?
3.5.
3.5 years. And I must say, I have hardly in my career met somebody who has this incredible knowledge of things all over the world. I learned a lot from him. I thought that I have some experience, but you know, there is so many you know very well. he has connections worldwide. You know, we were sitting together and saying, well, who do we get on this podium? And we need, you know, somebody from, I don't know, I can pick any country, from Somalia or Yemen. So, well, I know a guy there, I call him, he will come. His connections are incredible. And also the way that he moderates roundtables, or I was just starting when he had to moderate what was left of our Middle East one, where he announced the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, and with a bit younger representatives from the Middle East, and how he did that was incredible. Thank you very much, Boris, for what you have done over the years for the Munich Security Conference internally and also with you. These are very, very big shoes to fill for a successor, and I was very happy to have you, and I wish you good luck in your next job.
Thank you very much, Christoph, for keeping me. Thank you, Wolfgang, for bringing me on. Thank you, Benedikt, wherever you are, for putting up with me. And most of all, a huge thanks to our team, which is truly fantastic. Thank you so much for everything.
So, that's it. See you next year for the 60th Munich Security Conference. It was wonderful to have you. Bye.
Well, that's been it. The Munich Security Conference 2023 is over. And now for one last round of thoughtful insights. He is joining us once again. Clemens, Verenkotte, live on the ground at the Hotel Bayerischer Hof. Clemens, so glad to see you back with us, and to ask one first question, maybe in an almost heretical way. Munich Security Conference 2023, was it worth it?
Absolutely. It was one word. It was just a one-issue conference, and it was Ukraine and consequences. Yeah.
One of the main matters you just mentioned, it was, of course, the Russian war against Ukraine. Was it, in hindsight, the right decision not to invite any Russian official to this table?
What was really missing a bit, if you compare it with other Munich security conferences, was the harsh exchange of political views. But this time, I think, Christoph Heusgen, and he justified his decision just a couple of minutes ago to not invite neither a Russian nor Iranian official here. This time I think it was probably the right decision insofar because the main issue was not political differences, but fundamental global security issues. If somebody is on a stage and a representative from a country killing at the moment, and for nearly 12 months, lots of people, innocent people in another country. So the decision was right. Why did I say it was worthwhile, this security conference? I think there were different issues to address. First of all, my impression was that the European states here, and then lots of prime ministers and head of states had been here, they really came to understand that they are supporting Ukraine for a long haul. This is something which was very clear. Secondly, they had also to admit that the territorial integrity of the European country, as far as NATO countries are concerned, is not the EU but NATO. This is something which I hadn't heard in this extensive admission a couple of years ago, but now this is the case. And thirdly, what I really got from here is that the US and the EU partner states are really on one page as long as it comes to supporting Ukraine. Usually you read something that's on paper or listen to other programs and saying there, well, there's unity and determination. This time I got, within the last 3 days, exactly this impression. It didn't matter if you would talk to people from the Baltic states or from Finland or also from countries like the UK. They are all on the same page and saying, how long will it take? And then they answer, and I think they're putting up with this with political decisions very fast too, as long as it takes. And then there is this very important question about what does that mean? And the main question there is there ever a concept of safety and independence of Ukraine as long as the Russian President Vladimir Putin is in charge? And this question was posed here a couple of times. And the answer, for example, from the German Foreign Minister, Annalena Baerbock, she was saying as long as Putin isn't changing his attitude and worldview completely, would turn around completely, the answer would be no. And if you talk to Polish delegates here, or for example, also from Baltic states, from Finland, Sweden, they were saying basically as long as Russia is under the rule of Putin, there will nothing change. And the Ukrainians are even more outspoken for very good reasons. They said, change Russia, then we have peace.
Clemens, maybe to end on a more personal note, what was your most memorable moment this year?
I think I have to admit it was Kamala Harris, the American Vice President, and she really put up in her speech the human suffering and the feeling of there had to be somebody accountable for these crimes. And she was really getting to examples, drastic examples of horrendous crimes committed by the Russian forces, and for sure also with a blessing and by order of Vladimir Putin and his regime. And then she concluded by saying, you know, now I'm a vice president, but prior to that I had been prosecutor in California. And I know that we have to collect, even nowadays, and this is the same, evidence. And if we concluded that the evidence is right, we present our results. And this was, for me, the most striking moment, because she concluded by saying, well, after these kind of evidence is already out in the open, Russia is committing crimes against humanity, which is another, for the first time officially from the United States, saying that this is the crime against humanity. And this was, for me, I wouldn't say, yeah, I can say touchy too, yeah.
Clemens, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for being with us and answering my simple questions.
Sure.
Take good care. And so do you. We're done. That's it. 3 days of global policy squeezed into one BR24, into one big BR24 live. Everything you need to know you can find online at www.br24.de. In German, yes, but you could use Google Translate if needed. Okay, thank you for watching. My name is Dominik Pasic. Have a lovely Sunday and God bless.